Mark. Now is it on? So we've got the minutes from the last meeting. Any amendments to the minutes? Is there a motion for the minutes?
Second.
Thanks, Representative Hamilton. So we have a proposed agenda as well. I do have two amendments I want to make to the agenda. Number one is CHE turned in a report for their tuition, and we kind of felt the way we read that it needs to be a review. So I want to make that a review item instead of a report for CHE on the tuition. And the second thing I want to do is, in statute, it says that the chair of the first commission will be voted on by the budget committee. So they can go ahead and start their agenda. We wanted to go ahead and do the chair of the first commission. So I would ask that that go on the agenda as well.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I move that we do both those things, add those to the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we have an agenda that's open for discussion. We're going to go ahead and now we'll do, thank you for reminding me, Rep. Porter, we'll do introductions. So Lisa, we'll start with you.
Ed Delaney, House District 86, north side of Indianapolis.
Rachel Bibler, Fiscal Analyst, Senate Majority Republican Caucus.
Chris Garton, State Senate District 45.
Liza Sherman, Fiscal Analyst for the House Republican Caucus.
Bob Cherry, District 53, Greenfield and Pendleton area.
Jessica Harmon, Legislative Services Agency.
Fadi Kadura, Senate District 30.
Susan Preble, Fiscal Analyst for the Senate Democrat Caucus.
Ben Tooley, Fiscal Analyst for the House Republicans.
Jeff Thompson, House District 28.
Ryan Mishler, Senate District 9, North Central Indiana.
Krista Ricci, Fiscal Analyst for the Senate Republican Caucus.
Zach Jackson, State Budget Director.
Joe Habig, Deputy Budget Director.
Gregory Porter, House District 96.
Eric Gonzalez, House Democrat Fiscal Analyst.
All right, thank you. We will now move forward with the agency projects. First on the agenda is the Department of Administration. Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Matt Kent. I'm the CFO at the Department of Administration. I've got 4 projects in front of you today for a couple different agencies, so I will dive right in. The first project is for the Department of Administration. This is a request of our annual release of R&R payments from IDOA to IFA managed facilities. These facilities were all originally bonded through the IFA, and a portion of those original bonds went to fund the capital R&R for the long-term planning of those buildings. So now that those funds have been defeased, we continue to make the R&R payments to fulfill the short and long-term capital needs of those buildings. The buildings, facilities listed on the agenda are as followed: Government Center North and South, the Government Center parking garages, Toxicology Lab, State Museum, correctional facilities at Rockville, Pendleton Juvenile, Wabash Valley, Newcastle, and Miami, and then state hospitals at Logansport, Evansville, and Madison. Like I said, this is an annual appropriation, so every June I come before the committee and make this request.
Questions? All right.
The second request I have is on behalf of the Indiana Archives and Records Administration. This is a request to begin construction of the new archives building. This will be a 5-story, 133,000 square foot building located on the Indianapolis Canal Walk, just west of the Indiana Government Center, Senate Avenue Garage. The office building will include office space for the archives staff, processing and imaging areas with technology upgrades, climate-controlled storage areas for archived documents, and then flex space for meetings and events. There will also be a tunnel that will connect the building to the tunnel underneath the Senate garage, so that will bring the building basically onto the campus. Once completed, the new facility will help ensure that Indiana Archives has the adequate space they need to complete their agency mission. The building will also establish a safer environment for the archival records and also make those records much easier to access for visitors. The design and programming phase of this project has been completed, and as soon as we receive these funds, we'll basically be ready to begin construction. The initial funds will go towards some of the long lead equipment orders that we'll need to put in, and then also some of the groundwork, which will be started in August of this year. Unfortunately, we will be closing down one lane each on Ohio Street and New York Street while the construction is taking place. By spring of 2024, we hope to have vertical construction taking place and then occupancy by late 2025 or early 2026.
Just for the record, I think we're going way overboard on an archives building, but I think I'm the only one that feels that way, so I'm outnumbered. But continue.
If I could
Go ahead,
react.
Rep. Delaney.
Yeah, we're over there because we chose not to bond this when we could have got it for $30 or $40 million. That's why we're over the top, as long as we're going to complain about the cost.
I'm glad I'm not the only one then. Rep. Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can remember the word bicentennial about the archive building, so that's an issue also. But my question is, what's the total cost of the archive building?
This will be $102 million at the end of the day. So we've received $5 million already, and then $97 million will go towards the construction.
So $102 million total?
Correct, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Kent.
Anyone else?
Maybe a little more palatable project here. Soldiers and Sailors Monument Plaza. So we're making a request for the War Memorial to continue waterproofing on the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. The War Memorial received $6.3 million in February of 2022 to begin this work, and we've already begun extensive work on the north-facing side of the monument. With these new funds, we hope to continue the work on the south side of the monument as well. This work includes pulling up and releveling all the limestone steps at the plaza level of the monument. And while those stones are up, we're laying down a new waterproof membrane, and we'll also be adding drainage systems to properly move water away from the structure and the basement. We then will relay the stone and seal the joints to ensure that the basement under the monument remains dry. Once the plaza is sealed correctly, a new HVAC system will be installed in the basement, museum level of the monument, and then the War Memorial hopes to reopen this basement space as a museum and a gift shop once the work is completed. The work on the north side will finish up late this summer, allowing for the monument to host its normal holiday activities, and then we will begin the work after the All-Star Game, the NBA All-Star Game in February of 2024 on the south end of the monument.
Questions?
Last request I have is for the Indiana State Library exterior renovation. This is for $2.2 million to fund Phase 3 of this exterior renovation. These funds will be focused on the east and south elevations of the building. Prior to this work beginning, the seals of the exterior were at the end of their useful life and beginning to fail. That deterioration led to spalling and cracking of the limestone and water infiltration into the building. The work being done will be very similar to the work we've done on the other two phases, resealing and repairing the exterior limestone, replacing the caulk and the mortar joints within the limestone, and then cleaning it once all the work is done. Coupled with the roof project we did in 2020 and the other two phases, this final phase will secure the envelope of the building of the State Library.
Questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the State Fair Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is John Peffenberger. I'm the CFO of the Indiana State Fair Commission. I'm here to request several items on behalf of the State Fairgrounds. The first item today, we request the release of $7 million to purchase a 200-meter portable banked indoor track and field surface so that the fairgrounds can host major national and international track and field events in the new Fall Creek Pavilion. This project will also renovate an existing walk tunnel to make it ADA compliant to connect the southeast corner of the infield parking lot and serve as the primary entryway for guests to the new Fall Creek Pavilion and other major facilities located on the southeast side of the fairgrounds.
Questions?
Thank you. The second item, we we request the release of $21,797,627 to complete the Phase 1 perimeter fence line project at the State Fairgrounds. The primary objective of this project is to improve the safety for our staff, customers, and the general public at the fairgrounds, as well as to improve the overall entry experience for our over 2 million guests that visit the fairgrounds each year. The project will also contemplate automation to our parking operations. The perimeter fence lines addressed in the scope of this project will include the entryways, gate structures, and fencing along 38th Street and Fall Creek Parkway. And part of this project will help also restore hardscape, streetscapes, and paving along the main entry to our campus in front of the Fall Creek Pavilion.
Questions?
Okay. The next, I'm sorry, sir.
Thank you. I usually ask it at the end, but in regards to this fence, who's the vendor on that?
We haven't bid the project yet.
You have not been the project?
Correct.
Okay. So we don't have any XBE numbers yet?
Not yet, sir.
Okay. Noted.
Okay. All right, the third item, we request $716,000 of funding to complete the final phase replacement of rooftop units on the Blue Ribbon Pavilion at the fairgrounds. The current units were installed in 1999 and have exceeded their expected useful life of 15 years. The project will replace a total of 13 units. There are two 70-ton units on the building and a combination of 2 and 4-ton units. The final item is we request the release of $335,000 for direct digital control systems, which will help centralize temperature controls in 4 facilities at the fairgrounds. This includes the 4-H Exhibit Hall, Centennial Hall, the Ag Hort Building, and the Expo Hall. The new system will allow the control of heating and cooling of the buildings from a single point and will help make these buildings more energy efficient. Okay.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item number 6 in regards to the Gate 6 entry plaza automated, you have not bidded that out yet?
That's correct.
That's correct. So what would the impact be on those individuals when I drive past the fairgrounds in the district I represent who work in the gates? What's going to happen to them? Is there going to be any displacement or what?
We don't expect that, but right now we're still studying what automation means for purposes of that project.
Okay, so, Mr. Chairman, if you will, in regards to the automation, I'd like to understand what their definition of automation is, because I know there are a number of individuals that do work there, and those are, as Cindy Hoy said a long time ago, for what they explained, these are survival dollars that they make when they're out there at the fairgrounds. Not a lot, but it does help pay some bills. I do not want workers to be displaced in regards to progress, or how we can absorb them if necessary within those 2 plus 3 million visitors that go to the state fairgrounds. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? All right, thank you. Next, we have Department of Transportation. Sorry, Lauren Wilburn?
Yes. Sorry, I thought I was in a different place. Okay, yep, Lauren Wilburn, Statewide Facilities Manager with the Department of Transportation, and I am speaking today on behalf of the Indianapolis Traffic Management Center in Marion County, and we are seeking $250,000 to replace the HVAC in the building. This building is 21 years old, and the HVAC is original to the building, so this will just be an entire replacement. And this is also going to be a Phase 1 that is going to preface a larger Phase 2 portion to basically rehabilitate the facility and make the internal building equipment components new.
Questions? All right, thank you.
Yep.
Next, we have Indiana Veterans Home.
Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Weimer, the Director of the Indiana Department of Veterans Affairs. And the Indiana Veterans Home is a facility that's been up in West Lafayette for over 125 years. And Mark Friel is the head of the maintenance, and he's going to discuss the specific projects.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. So the Indiana Veterans Home is requesting funds to replace 2 of our condensing boilers on site, as well as install an industrial backwash filter and controllers for the new boiler system installed. So the boilers supply heat for over 250,000 square feet of our campus facility, and more specifically, to provide a home-like, comfortable environment for our residents. It's necessary too, with the boiler failures we experienced, just to ensure that we provide adequate heating to maintain compliance in the event of void of any evacuation of residents to another facility. So our boiler 2 and boiler 3 were actually inoperable, we found earlier this year, due to cracked fire tubes found in the heat exchanger. And that was verified through an internal inspection of this equipment they found excessive corrosion in the system due to dirty makeup water, causing those fire tubes inside the heat exchanger to crack, and which cannot be replaced and inoperable. Also, so we're proposing to replace those 2 pieces of components too for our boiler system, as well as install an industrial backwash filter that is actually self-cleaning in the water loop too, that'll prevent and maintain the appropriate water chemistry for the boilers moving forward too. With that also, there'd be an automated header controller as well too, that's actually set based on the outside temperatures, so those boilers will actually operate and cycle with each other too, to avoid from overheating, as well as cut back on cost of the utilities of the facility. So we did present this plan to the Department of Public Works. They reviewed it and met with the contractors involved for it, and they improved the course of action moving forward. And with that, Barn, any questions?
Questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the Adjutant General's Office, Colonel Kathy Eakin.
Good afternoon, I'm Colonel Kathy Eakin. On behalf of Major General Dale Lyles, the Indiana National Guard requests $143,435 for a new boiler system to replace a 30-year-old system currently at the Rockville Armory. It has completely failed at this point. The current boiler system, as I said, has completely failed, and the original amount requested when it was in a failed state last year temporarily was approved for $196,000, 50% of which would be covered by state funds. The updated request is due to bid costs going up, and that request reflects a 50% cost of the total of $285,871, and that other half will be funded federally. So that's why our request is only $143,000. If not funded, the Indiana National Guard will be required to use alternate means to heat the building, typically through electrical means, and it will cost about 50% more than if we had the boiler system in place, thus incurring additional costs that are not necessary in our eyes. So pending your questions, that's all I have for today.
Questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Department of Natural Resources, Kirsten Haney.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We have 3 projects today. So our first one is requesting funding to upgrade 12 of our shooting ranges on Fish and Wildlife properties and build an additional range at Clark State Forest. These upgrades include work such as bullet catchers and backstops, electrical work, drainage, target upgrades, grading, and more, which will allow ADA accessibility. The new one at Clark State Forest will contain ranges for both firearms and archery, ADA compliant pathways, sporting clays, an education center, and noise control designs. Our upgrades in the new range will provide a safer, accessible, and more enjoyable experience for our visitors and staff while increasing the projected shooting opportunities. And this is funded through a mixture of state and federal funds.
Senator Garten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to highlight the project and say thank you for your work there. That's in my district. I've sent rounds downrange at that particular gun range. It is, to say it's in a really bad state of affairs is an understatement. And so I just appreciate the fact that we're focusing on that, and it's a tremendous asset that we have here in the state. So thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
Anyone else? All right, continue.
Next is our agency general rehab. This is a request for funding of Annual agency-wide general rehabilitation projects. This request is an accumulation of 45 smaller projects at our state parks, nature preserves, fish and wildlife areas, and law enforcement facilities. The projects range from small-scale roof replacements, masonry repairs, pier rehabilitation, restroom repairs, office rehab, and others. And these projects address our health, safety, and compliance issues with minimal service interruptions.
Questions?
And our last one is the Jasper Pulaski Visitor Center. So this is a request to build a new visitor center for the Jasper Pulaski Fish and Wildlife Area. The current check station that greets our visitors was constructed in the 1950s, and the office space was constructed in 2008, neither of which meet the needs of today's visitors and staff. The new building will house both office space and check station, allowing the old office to turn into a maintenance facility, and then the new visitor center will be located closer to the largest gathering space within the area to better greet and be available for our visitors. This project is also funded with a mixture of both federal and state dollars.
Rep. Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you think this project will generate more visitors to the area?
We do, yeah. It's actually been a project that's been in demand for that area for quite some time, and we have a lot of support for
Do you
it.
have any projected numbers on that or the outcomes on our investment?
Not with me today, but I can send them to you.
Okay, because I think that's important to know our return. I mean, it's going to happen. I think we support it. We also like to see how much what will happen to pump money back into the economy in that community.
Sure, yeah.
To communities. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? All right.
Thank you.
Next, we have Public Safety Commission. Kelly Dignan.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kelly Dignan. I'm the Executive Director of the Integrated Public Safety Commission. The Integrated Public Safety Commission was established in 1999 to provide interoperable communication for our first responders. We support, our radio system provides communication in every county, either as a primary or a backup. At this moment, we estimate there's about 17,000 first responders using the radio at this time. Over 1 million, what we refer to as push-to-talks, or 1 million transmissions asking for help or sending a responder to a citizen in need. We're requesting funding today to maintain that system, particularly for the microwave system. That would also require us to stay in compliance with the FCC FAA rules. So tightening guy wires on our towers, grounding inspections and repair to the grounding wires, climbing systems, painting those towers, and replacing lighting that is either out of life, out of support, or have been struck by lightning. In addition, our microwave system runs on batteries when we lose commercial power or before the generator kicks on. So we need to replace those batteries. 11 microwave panels that keep those batteries charged while electricity is running. Dehydrators to keep moisture out of the system so the electronics within the building do not fail. Uninterrupted power supplies so that the system will continue to run while there's a transition between commercial power and the generator. And then we also have 17 generators that need to be replaced, 48 HVAC systems that need to be replaced, and then general building maintenance like roofs, seals, painting, caulking. Do you have any questions?
Questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next, we have the IEDC and David Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Before we dive into the requests, I just want to take a brief moment to thank you for your continued support and commitment to the IDC's vision. Thanks to your leadership, the IDC has secured nearly $30 billion of committed capital investment in just the last 6 quarters. Historically, that would have taken 6 years, but thanks to you, we have been able to jointly accelerate that number. And it's happening all over the state. Nearly half of this investment has occurred in rural and mixed rural areas, not just in urban areas. And more importantly, these are focused on the economies of the future, industries that will drive our economy for the next 50 years. These bring high-paying jobs that can have generational change for Hoosiers. Our projects for 2023 have an average hourly wage of $35.32, which is 7% higher than the U.S. average wage. So Indiana's momentum has never been stronger, and with continued investment, we will continue to top that. So as Mark will detail, the requests before you today follow this trend and our investments in these high-wage industries of the future, an investment today that will pay off and benefit Hoosiers for decades to come.
Thank you, David. Mr. Chairman, members of the Budget Committee, as David mentioned, my name is Mark Waske, Senior Vice President for Community Affairs at the IEDC, and we appreciate the opportunity to present 5 projects today for your review. The first item for your consideration is a request for $122 million in funding from the deal closing appropriation included in this year's budget to acquire approximately 1,000 acres of land currently under control by the IEDC in support of a generational multi-billion-dollar project currently evaluating Indiana for its investment. While the project has not yet committed to the state, we are confident in Indiana's value proposition and need this property to locate the project if and when the company makes its site selection decision. We must purchase the property in advance of a final decision, as our options have been called by the landowner requiring an acquisition this summer. In the event that Indiana is not chosen for the project, we are confident that the significant interest in the site identified we will be able to dispose of the property in support of other economic development opportunities in the near term. Should that be the case, the IEDC proposes transferring the expense to the site acquisition fund, utilizing the property in support of other economic development projects, as I just mentioned. Again, in the event of the sale of the property, those funds would be returned to the general fund and after Budget Committee review, subsequently transferred to a revolving fund for future land acquisitions. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Representative Porter.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mark and Mr. Rosenberg, for being here. So how confident are you that we can compete with Michigan in regards to this semiconductor plant?
Well, first, we do not know our competition. I just want to make that clear. We do not know our competition, but we are very confident based on the tools that this legislature has provided to us, being able to be in this running. It was a global search, and from our understanding, we are a finalist in that search and are looking forward to continuing to work with the company on landing them here in Indiana.
So you're going to sit there and tell me you have no idea who the other people are, other states are?
I mean, we could throw a dart at a map and guess, but no, we do not know who that other state is.
I found out, so I don't understand why you haven't. In regards to the water, it takes a lot of water to run a semiconductor plant like that. What are we going to do? Are we going to get water from Citizens Energy Group, or are we going to drain the Wabash, or, versus, Lake Michigan? Help me understand that, because that's a lot of water for that.
It certainly is, yes. And so there are multiple phases. The first phase is Citizens and bringing about 10 million gallons per day to the site. We're also having conversations with other water utility providers to increase that capacity to upwards of 20 million gallons per day. And then looking at the phase 2, we started engineering and design studies on the potential to bring water from the Wabash to the Louisville Aquifer, which is replenished by the Great Lakes. So as long as there's water in the Great Lakes, there will be water in this aquifer. And we're going through those studies now. We should have those preliminary results probably in the next month or two. And then we can implement a strategy on whether that's the right source to bring water from.
So the citizens of Marion County, or Indianapolis Citizens Water Group Company, I know our bills are extremely high, from the quote big dig, and so, but we're going to take that water from what we have that we're kind of paying for, and we're going to move it up north. Right?
So no, this is a bulk water sale from Citizens to Lebanon Utilities. The water is not originating in or moving through Marion County to get to the site.
Okay, $122 million for 1,000 acres. That's $122,000 an acre. That's a lot.
Some of it does include improvements to land, which increase the per acre costs, whether it be buildings or improvements made to the land by the owner.
So if, and Mark, you mentioned that if we don't get the project, the dollars would sit there for, you didn't say, but revert back to the general fund or back to a line item somewhere that you can utilize it in the future, right? And so when will you know that this project is going to occur now?
Yeah, Representative Porter, that's a great question, and the funding would be used to purchase the property over the course of this summer. In the event that we do not land this project, we would then utilize the land and sell it to other companies that would use it for their economic development projects, thereby bringing the proceeds back to the state.
So you already have you already have other companies in the pipeline, is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay. What other incentives do we have? We have, IEDC has a lot of incentives, but what else are we going to do? What are you guys going to do? Because I'm trying to be more transparent, and some things are, I don't want to be in the room negotiating. I've done it before, but don't want to do it now. But what other incentives are out there that you guys, that this company, IEDC, is going to put forth to lure individuals here?
Absolutely, and happy to have colleague Brock provide some additional context. But as it relates to this specific project, we have not gotten to the point where we have begun discussing what potential incentives would be and look like for the company. We anticipate some additional information from them here in the next month or so, which will allow us to really begin to determine what credits, grants, or other tools that the IEDC has been provided by the General Assembly to be able to completely secure this commitment for Indiana.
I would just augment that, Representative Porter, by saying, particularly around LEAP, when we're looking to incentivize projects, it's a multifaceted offering. Many times it is direct incentives, it could be land value, but it's also public infrastructure support. It's investment into roadways, water utilities, even child daycare centers. There are a lot of things of projects of this scale that go towards the quote project bottom line that aren't necessarily dollars. And again, a nod to this committee and the larger legislature, things like READY, for example, the investments that we're making into the community, those are benefits that absolutely get reflected as direct and indirect benefits to any project, looking at LEAP, but particularly these projects.
Thank you. One last question, Mr. Chairman, please. And I appreciate that. So what about, you used the word public infrastructure. What about the human infrastructure? What about jobs? Do you have the capacity, or will we be poaching from surrounding counties to bring jobs around that 100,000, that 1,000 acres or whatever? Are they job ready? Are we job ready to, personnel ready to provide those jobs to those individuals?
We believe we are. We believe we're well positioned. And admittedly, that's one of the key pieces of due diligence that companies of projects this size really do. It's site readiness and it's availability of labor. And so our analysis, our data, our strategy seems to align with what we're hearing from a lot of companies considering LEAP, which is it won't be cannibalizing necessarily from other businesses. There is the existing workforce or opportunity for growing workforce to augment and supplement what's already here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Delaney.
Yeah, let me understand the structure of this. First of all, this money that you want, that's approximately $122 million, what fund does that come from?
So that would be coming from the deal closing line item in this year's budget.
So in the budget, we put a round number for deal closing, right? We didn't attribute it to any particular deal.
That's correct.
Then later on in your memo here, you refer to transferring the money potentially to the site acquisition strategies appropriation. That's a different appropriation.
Yes.
From the point of view of a legislator or the citizen, a dollar is a dollar, and we don't care what category you take it from, I would assume. Which leads to sort of a broad question. What are you asking us to know? First, let's start with asking to know, and then secondly, what are you asking us to do? Are we supposed to approve, disapprove? So first, what are we supposed to know in order to decide what we think about this item number 16?
Representative Delaney, we are asking you to approve the release of $122 million from the $500 million appropriation in deal closing incentives from the budget. The reason for the potential movement of the accounting to a different fund is the Site Acquisition Strategies Fund has the potential to become a revolving fund utilized by the IEDC to purchase land, sell it, and then redeploy those proceeds to acquire other property. So that is the intent of, in the event that we have to do that, would be the intent of accounting for this expense in a different fund.
And what's the total of the two funds together, the deal closing and the site acquisition?
$650 million.
Okay. And if this deal fell through, for example, so there's, let's say, $500 million left between these funds, is that considered part of the surplus or not?
I am not qualified to answer that. I'd have to look.
From your point of view, your intention is to hold on to that money, even if, for example, this big deal fell through.
We have to purchase the land this summer, so we will expend the funds this summer.
You don't have to purchase the land. You use the term that you're in control. Some seller is telling you buy it now or don't buy it. Is that right?
We have purchased other land from
I know that.
this
But
buyer.
this particular transaction, somebody set a deadline to close?
Yes.
So you have a contract, but you don't have title yet. Okay. I'm just trying to understand the nature of the transaction. But I'm back to the core question, which, I'm new here, so not new in this building, but in this particular role. I feel very uninformed, not because you're withholding, but partly because of the nature of the transaction. You're negotiating a big deal with somebody that I don't need to know about. But given my lack of information, our lack of information in my view, what is it you're telling us that we're supposed to act on? I mean, what level of confidence do I have in these proposals that they're likely to happen? I just don't, and where are you going? So if this doesn't happen and then we got $500 or $600 million in the fund, where's it going to go?
So I guess, again, the ask is to have the Budget Committee review and approve the release of funding from the appropriation that was created in the budget and what is required by the budget. And then as far as the remaining funds through those two line items, it would be utilized in similar fashions on other economic development projects.
Is there any desire to spread some of this money around the state? Because this is a very large chunk of money, and I have nothing but affection for Boone County, but that leaves 91 other counties without a similar transaction. So do you have a strategy for making sure the money gets around the state?
Absolutely, Representative, and appreciate the question. As I mentioned, nearly half of that $30 billion we've done just this past 6 quarters, half of that has been in rural or mixed rural areas. And so you see projects like Stellantis and Samsung in Kokomo, you see GM and Samsung in New Carlisle, a lot of activity at the ports down in Mount Vernon. So it is, we had over $1 billion transaction in Terre Haute. So it truly is a statewide, Indiana's momentum is unprecedented due to a lot of the onshoring modernization and the tools that this legislature has passed to date. So yes, we have nearly $125 billion pipeline of potential deals that are in some phase, whether it be the RFI process, site selection, negotiations. And so yes, this funding, the $650 million that we have over the biennium will be put to good use over those 2 years.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to kind of sum up here. So I think we can simplify. I understand his questions. So you have an option on this land. The option is going to expire, so you have to purchase the land. Are we correct? Am I correct in that statement?
Correct.
Okay. So you have a deal on the table, but you're not sure if the deal is going to go through, but you're stuck because you got to buy the land. So you're going to use this money to purchase the land. If the deal goes through, everything's good. If the deal does not go through, then the intent is when another company comes along, you will sell the land to another company and then reimburse yourself in the fund, basically, to simplify it, for the money that you laid out for the land. Is that the easiest way to explain what I think? I think that's what Representative Delaney, I'm just putting the pieces together here.
Correct, yeah. Either use the land as part of the credit or sell the land and then, again, work with State Budget Committee for the potential to use that as a revolving fund moving forward.
I will augment to your question too, the nature of the state revolving fund and the nature of if we are successful in landing a project of this size or any other in LEAP is we do have to look to other parts of the state that could accommodate. And so having that ability to not oversaturate any given area and appropriately spread large operations of that scale across the state, we see an advantage to that too.
I think the thing that's left unclear is if you're buying a particular 5,000 acres because of an interest of a potential investor, you're not buying it because that's the best assortment of 5,000 acres in the state for all purposes. You're buying it for a particular purpose. If that transaction doesn't go forward, you've tied up a very significant amount of your capital in a place that you chose for a particular reason that is now gone. That's sort of what's...
The overall, sorry.
Yeah, I'm done.
The overall LEAP Innovation Development District is a focus on these economies of the future. So Eli Lilly is the anchor tenant with their $3.7 billion investment. This is just the southwest portion of that has already a lot of interest. We've been holding off, even submitting as LEAP as part of RFIs, or we've redirected companies to other parts of the state. But the pipeline through LEAP is very strong, and this piece of land is very desirable. So we have a high degree of confidence that it will be actionable. And we've even seen portions of land just outside of what we have control on being bought by developers that are sitting on that now for even higher than we are purchasing land from. And so the entire area is very hot on the real estate market right now.
In addition to, I would say, the vetting of LEAP, while this project is an opportunity, or the land acquisition, the level of due diligence that we did to vet the site's site readiness, if you will, or viability, it did rank and score at the very top of that list. And so it's not necessarily for this specific end user. It does fit within the broader due diligence and strategy of identifying a key state-sponsored mega site in a place that could support it.
Senator Burton. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding is this is a project that's garnered some attention over the past few months. Is that a fair assessment? So a couple questions I have when I look at the overall cost. I know there's some discussion of infrastructure costs with regards to this particular piece of property. Within this 122 that you're requesting, are those infrastructure costs of water, sewer, all that, are they included in this, or is that an additional expense to the 122?
Additional, this is for land.
Any idea how much more for that infrastructure expense?
So for phase one of getting the 10 million gallons per day, it's probably 150 to 200 million. And then phase two, we're undergoing that engineering design study currently, and so we don't have hard numbers on that.
So it's fair to say, to Representative Porter's point earlier on, that $122,000 per acre actually goes up significantly because without the infrastructure, the land's not worth
Correct.
anything in regards to development projects. Is that fair?
And as we have done with, for example, Lilly, a lot of that infrastructure is priced into the amount we sell it back to the company for to recoup some of those costs.
So I think Commissioner Chambers has been fantastic. You and your team have been fantastic. You guys have the numbers speak for themselves in the state of Indiana. But with regards to this particular project, some of the questions that I've gotten from Hoosiers that I'd love to hear from you on is, it seems like if we're buying a piece of property without a commitment, and now you're going to sit on that property if that deal falls through, and then sell that to other businesses, that now puts the state of Indiana in direct competition with the private sector from a land development perspective. And so the question then becomes, what role should government play in that space? And so I'm just going to ask you that simple question. Most of the time what I see, I mean, I've bought and sold some properties over my lifetime. A lot of times what happens is if you don't have a commitment from somebody, you sign what's called a first right? A first right of refusal. So with regards to the structure of some of these LEAP projects and different things, that may not be enough of a commitment to be eligible for that. I don't know. But could you just speak to that a little bit and help me and maybe some Hoosiers listening understand why it is we have to go about it this way?
Sure, yeah. To the first point, we have some great mega sites throughout the state, River Ridge being one, and up in New Carlisle now developing as well. So throughout the state, we have really good resources. We don't have many that are of this size, and that has been a detriment as we pursue some of these larger mega site projects where someone needs 500 to 1,500 acres. There's not a lot of those types of parcels that are out there that are, zoned, have utilities there, have road infrastructure planned. And so LEAP has been a focus on those type of mega sites that need that speed. We say speed is the new incentive, and being able to have a site ready for development to make that $1 billion investment, get that ROI sooner, that's very, very attractive to the market, as we've seen already. Dave Ricks, CEO of Lilly, in his comments at their groundbreaking said without the LEAP district, Lilly would not have made that investment in Indiana, and that's their largest single site investment that they've ever done, and obviously the first investment in the state in nearly 3 decades. And so understand the comment on competition, but it is truly, I think, 2 different types of projects that we're going after at LEAP, and then also private sites. And, Brock can speak to it. We have, someone has shown interest in LEAP, but it's not the appropriate site for it. We have backed out, deferred to other sites that are more appropriate for that type of. So there is a good collaboration with the ecosystem on those.
And I appreciate that. With regards to the actual structure of how we progress through the deal, talk to me about, a first right versus buying the property up front without the commitment.
Yeah, certainly. So as LEAP has garnered more attention, and people understand the value of the land that they're sitting on, early on, we were able to put together a solid number of acres without, a lot of attention, and now it's becoming more and more. And so through the negotiations, we pushed the closing out as long as possible, which is mid-July, which is why we're here today. We have tried to move as much land as possible that there's not a project on to future closings and continue just to pay the option agreements on those. But this particular seller had other 1031 land that they needed to close on, and so it was part of the timing transaction that put us in this spot today.
I appreciate that. That does share some context that I wasn't aware of because the 1031 program, the tax exchange with land. I understand that completely, so I appreciate you shedding some light on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to remind the committee, today we're reviewing the $122 million for this particular project. I guess we're getting kind of ahead of ourselves on a what if. So what we're doing is reviewing for that project. If that project doesn't go through and you sell that land, that money goes back to the general fund as it stands now.
Correct.
In order for that money to go back into your revolving fund, it has to come back in front of Budget Committee. So just remember, for any next steps, the money, it has to come back to Budget Committee. So for today, we're reviewing for this particular project. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I just have.
Senator Cador.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions, and I appreciate that last clarification. That was very helpful. That was part of my question, which is the money will be released from the deal closing, but in case it doesn't happen, it goes back to the site acquisition fund. So the question is, why does it not go back to the closed deal closing instead of staying in that site acquisition fund?
So in the budget, we had a $500 million deal closing fund and then $150 million site acquisition. With the revolving fund was only tied to the site acquisition. We are purchasing land, but we contemplate that being part of a credit to the company, which would essentially be a deal closing fund function, and not necessarily selling the land. But should we get to the point that we were selling the land, like Senator Mishler said, we would come back to this body to talk about next steps with that funding should that land be sold.
I appreciate it. My final question, has there been, and you might not be able to disclose everything publicly, but I know that when we do projects, we don't do projects for the sake of doing projects. There must be some kind of cost-benefit analysis of why we're doing this for the state of Indiana. I think in Wisconsin and other states, they invested billions of dollars on projects that ended up being scaled back. So my question is there anything that you can share publicly about the cost-benefit analysis in the form of the jobs that will be created, the average salaries? I know that today we're talking about the 122 million, but the approval of the first step subsequently will lead to all of these other important discussions. Is there anything you can share publicly about the cost-benefit analysis of the investment that taxpayers have to pay that bill? How many jobs will be created? What is the average salary, and what is the benefit to the state?
So we can't talk specifics as we know them today. I will say all of our incentive tools are performance-based, and so the company has to hit certain milestones, no matter what it is, this project or any, to receive those benefits. But I'll turn over to Brock to talk about how we've implemented a deal scoring matrix and an internal rate of return.
And I'll just augment to underscore, all the incentives that we do offer are performance-based and kind of scale to what they say. So in the event that a project scales lower, it would kind of automatically buffer against that for the exact reason. But really to your question, there's, I would say, 3 prongs of our analysis that we look at. And without going into the specifics and giving away our magic, one is a deal score. And so we look at qualitative and quantitative factors on any given project. Those are, we're trying to be able to make apples to apples among all projects with similar characteristics, even though, you can never compare truly. So that's one thing. That tells us, does it match with our strategy, with the type of company, the profile, if you will, of a company that we want to attract. We then also layer that with a cost-benefit analysis. So the true, when does it break even? What are kind of the traditional division or multiplication, subtraction minus metrics? And then in addition to that, we do an internal rate of return or a modified internal rate of return analysis. So looking very much from an investment standpoint, is this a good investment based on inflow of tax revenue and outflow of tax dollars? And obviously there we're chartered with being prudent, not having things that don't break even, have a positive return for the state. So that's the approach that we take on all of the deals.
I appreciate it. I've been engaged in economic development deals before in my prior job. My final question is can you share publicly, because I assume the company is looking for creating a certain number of jobs to be able to sustain their business model. Have they disclosed publicly, or does IEDC have an idea of that you can share publicly that we know for almost $500 million between the initial 122 million, the additional infrastructure dollars and the incentives, the performance-based incentives? When we get to $500 million worth of investing in this project, do we know what that return might look like? So my specific question is, do you have a certain number of years, 10, 15, 20 years, when we break even that you can disclose publicly? And the second question, how many jobs do you think will be created as part of this deal?
So a lot of those details we can't disclose publicly, and I'll also say we have not received a formal request for a response, and so some of those numbers are still to be determined. It is, we do expect it to be a very large investment and headcount, and as David alluded to, very much the economy of the future. The types of positions that we understand it to be are, they're careers, they're not jobs. And so maybe I'll just leave it at that.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Porter?
Follow up. So, per all discussion, if you don't have site control, that's part of the equation. We got to have site control. If we don't have site control, they'll walk away.
Speed is the new incentive.
I'm sorry?
Speed is the new incentive. And so you asked earlier, how do we build a package? Showing land control, site acquisition equates to speed in a company's mind.
Okay, and you feel that someone else would come in and pay $122,000 per acre, according to your analysis, and we will not take a loss on that if they do not acquiesce to us.
I'm not going to comment on real estate transaction pricing, so maybe I'll
Okay,
Mark.
well, it's our money. So it's not about, commenting, but it's about economics, David.
No, I appreciate it, Representative Porter. And we are, but with what we know in the pipeline, the type of deals that are looking at the site, we are extremely confident that parcel, should we move forward with this purchase and approval of this body, that parcel will be put into good use in these economies of the future that reflect what we're trying to do at LEAP in the very near future.
If you, let's say even just broke it up and you offered other incentives, let's say 5 companies buy that land and you offer those incentives, I mean, you would plan it that the incentive equals the amount that you have invested in the land. So in a way, you can control what you incentivize based on what you have in the land. So you do have a little control over that.
Correct.
Okay, fair. Thanks. Anyone else? Director Jackson?
Thank you, Chairman. And gentlemen, just probably a question I should already know the answer to, but in terms of if everything goes as planned with the semiconductor company, at what point would you guys transfer title of the land? I mean, is it that they would become the owners of this land? You would not retain it. How do you make sure you get the investments and everything? Is it after they make their capital investment, then you transfer ownership, or?
You know, each end user is different. As we understand projects of this size, is they don't want to be leasing a building or property. And so generally when a deal or a transaction goes through, they want title to the land immediately so they can start moving dirt and doing what they need to do.
What's the guarantee then that they fulfill their end of the bargain? After you've given them a piece of land worth $122 million, how do you make sure that they fulfill what the promised investment?
And so this goes to a lot of the due diligence considerations that we also layer with the investment analysis, where we do profiles of companies, look at debt ratings, look at past performance either in the state, elsewhere. And frankly, that's baked into some of the judgment of maybe how aggressive or the structure at which we would offer incentives.
But this is different than like a traditional credit in that they have to create that job before they get that tax credit. It's a promise up front. I mean, they're getting the asset and
this is where
it's not unique necessarily.
Yeah, and so
a few times, but I just want to make sure I understand it.
I would say this is art of the deal, where I think ideally we would not like to being the owner of the land and transfer that immediately. And then come back and have the conversation with what we want to do. So I think the guarantee, I can't speak in guarantees because it's an unknown, but I have a high degree of confidence that should this company or another select to go at this site, that they're going to want to immediately take title to land so they can start doing what they need to do.
Thank you.
I mean, is there any thought of putting a clawback in there that you sign over title of the land, and if they don't meet the criteria, you have a clawback in there on the land?
Yes, and even to the extent I think we've discussed and talked, with the locals that, let's say somebody does want to sell the land and transition else their operations. We also want a right of first refusal to buy back a facility or a piece of property to make sure that it is conforming with that broader LEAP vision, that it's not going to an unintended end user that the locals or the community may not want. So I think those are the type of protections in addition to the performance-based that around any land transaction sale, it would need to conform to the potential PUD, those other aspects, and then as title holder, that's the luxury of being in control of some of those provisions, as you mentioned.
Well, that was my next thing, because if they pay $122 million, turn around and they sell for $250 million and then profited on our money, that's where I think the first right of refusal that Senator Garten brought up would come in handy, that you have a protection there as well.
And Senator Mishler and Zach, to a similar question that you had, a great example of that is what we were able to negotiate with the GM stamping plant land for Elanco, where if they did not perform, there were clawback provisions in there, just like all of our other incentives.
That's why I brought it up, because that was my suggestion then too. So thank you. Anyone else? All right, next one.
All right. The second project we're presenting for your review is a request for a release of additional deal closing incentives to support Project North Star. a recently announced $3.5 billion state-of-the-art battery manufacturing operation located in St. Joseph County. The Budget Committee last year approved $100 million in deal closing incentives for this project, but since that point in time, the company's capital investment has increased by over $1 billion. In light of these changes and other increases related to wages for the committed jobs, the IDC is requesting an additional $35 million in funding from the deal closing fund in this year's budget. Like every commitment to resources, as was mentioned, these are performance-based and must be earned by the company before it is eligible to receive the funds from the IDC in accordance with metrics that we established for capital investment, job creation, and wages included in our final agreement for public financial resources. These funds, assuming that those metrics are met, would be distributed to the company over a period of 7 years. Happy to answer any questions.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question to, so what is performance-based grant? Is it like the EDGE grant or what?
Yeah, Representative Porter, it would function similar to EDGE in that they would have to report to the IADC on an annual basis with information regarding their capital investment, the number of jobs that they have created, and the withholdings that were generated as a result of those wages being paid to employees. We would then review that and have the opportunity to consult with DOR to verify the information if necessary prior to certifying the credit, or in this case, releasing that portion of the grant to the company.
The $100 million that we did last year, has that all been spent?
No, it has not. We have not executed the contract.
You have not allocated that?
No.
Not at all? So, but they came back and said they're going to invest, I think said $1 billion more. And that's the reason why you need the additional $35 million? Because $100 million wasn't good enough? Incentive, and I mean, I'm just trying to let the lay people know.
You're speaking my language.
Now, the $100 million was for the initial $2.5 billion investment. This additional $35 million is for the $1 billion investment. So overall, it's a $135 million cash performance grant incentive from the state for a $3.5 billion investment, 1,700 jobs and higher wages.
Okay, so are there other dollars going toward this project at EV? Any additional funding?
Yes, this is the cash performance grant or the deal closing fund is part of a larger package.
All right, and as Senator Commissioner talks about, is there a clawback?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Structured.
It's structured in the deal?
Structured in the deal, absolutely.
Okay, because I know there were headlines a few months ago when things have been pretty quiet about the project in St. Joseph County.
And maybe it's in the news and it's public now. So as you may have remembered last summer, they had a different JV partner that GM was going to move forward with. And as that shifted and changed, it delayed the project a bit. And what did occur is they came back with a revised scope that increased by $1 billion of capital investment and also saw increased wages and additional payroll be adjusted from where it was originally. So
I'm going to nickname you Radar because that's my next question. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I think what's key about that too, being there's like 3 states there. So you got workforce in Indiana, you're right on the Michigan line, and then you have Illinois. And with the double tracking, I think the goal is if we don't have the people, then people could move here and still have access to the double tracking. So I don't know if that was part of that location, was the 3-state piece on the land. I'm not sure, but it seems like that'd be a pretty good incentive on that one. And you said somebody asked about throughout the state. I mean, here's one that's up north, $135 million on the northern part of the state for a $3 billion investment. So I think it's fair to say it's not all in central Indiana. So thank you. I got one more.
All right. The next agenda item for your review is a request for $10 million from the deal closing appropriation in support of the recently announced project from General Motors, which plans to invest over $630 million to retool its Fort Wayne assembly plant operations to accommodate the production of a new line of full-size heavy-duty trucks in Indiana. The company is also committed to retaining 3,300 existing high-wage jobs in Northeast Indiana as a result of this commitment. Again, these are performance-based and will be distributed to the company after verification and certification of performance around capital investment, job retention, and wages to those employees, and dispersed to the company over a 5-year term.
Questions? Representative Porter?
So these are not additional jobs? It's just maintaining what we have? 300, how many, what did you say?
3,300.
3,300 jobs. So what's the incentive in the commitment to another name? Is this another name for performance grant or what?
Yes, so they would have to retain those employees and pay them agreed upon wage levels, average wage levels, in order to receive a portion of this incentive.
Okay. So there's no new jobs, just retaining what we have. Do you think, I mean, I pass that a lot. Do you think they would just get up and just leave? I mean, it's a monstrosity up there on 69.
It is a large facility. You know, what I would just say, you've seen in the news the electrification of all of the big 5 automakers, and similar to what we saw last year in Marion, when they made the investment to retool there, it positioned them to really service the EV transition, and they had the opportunity to put that investment into a few locations, knowing that not all of the existing stamping facilities would ultimately long-term survive because of some of that electrification transition. And so in a similar way, that was a consideration that was being had at the Fort Wayne facility as well, as they look at the next generation of pickup trucks. There are other locations that investment could occur, and it wasn't lost on us either that that is one of GM's, you know, most popular products. It fuels their ability to grow, their ability to electrify. And so we saw it as an opportunity not only to supplant and bolster that facility long term, but also as that broader strategic play of making Indiana an electric vehicle hub.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? All right, I guess you got 2 more.
All right. The IEDC is also requesting your approval to allocate $16 million from the Site Acquisition Strategies Fund to acquire approximately 290 acres of property in Boone County. The IEDC is in active negotiations on a purchase and sale agreement with a company proposing to invest approximately $3.2 billion to construct a new data center facility while creating up to 250 new high-wage jobs. The IDC does plan to sell the property to the company once final site selection has been made and we execute the purchase and sale agreement. Proceeds from the sale of this property will be returned to the general fund, back to the site acquisition line item. And after coming back to the budget committee, we like to utilize those for future land acquisition.
We can address that at that time.
And just to supplement this with some of the other questions, the data center tax credit that this legislature passed a few years ago would minimize the need for other incentives. So the land and being able to sell that to the company is kind of the main step, but already in legislation is the data center tax credit.
So you said a tax credit. If I recall, didn't we do something that just made all their equipment tax exempt?
That's correct. It's
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. I had to go back in time there. Questions? Representative Delaney?
Am I right to assume this is part of the LEAP district also? Okay. And am I right to understand that none of this property is acquired by eminent domain? So have we seen the prices of your acquisition going up because of your acquisitions?
So I think some of that, but also, like I said, there are others speculating around the area as well that are purchasing property and new housing developments that are planned up there. And so just the general market and the anticipation of more development in the area has definitely driven up costs.
So
yeah,
go ahead.
Our options we've had for I can't remember exactly how long, but we put a stake in the ground early before a lot of this, but definitely acreage in the area has been increasing.
Yeah, because if you didn't have an early commitment, then everything you did would drive up the price of the land you wanted to acquire. So you begin to chase your own tail there, and it gets pretty expensive.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Representative Porter?
I guess, thank you, Mr. Chairman, I guess in the grand scheme of things, this is only $5,000 an acre, right? So, but if the 290 jobs are not created with that $3.2 billion investment, what dollar amount do you think we will get in regards to that $16 million investment? What was the return on our investment?
If we sell the property to the company, so that's still be determined, but as we talked about, building in some of the infrastructure costs to that sale price and not taking a loss on that purchase.
Yeah, and then, again, the water issue, it's a lot of water. So how would that materialize? And, because I didn't make I can't remember, a big splash about this somewhere, a data center, I think we did up in Hammond, Indiana, which is kind of further where some water is. So what about the H2O?
It is a lot of water for data center relatively to semiconductor or some others. It's not as large. The capacity in the phase one build outs that David talked about, we've got confidence that that'll be able to serve some of the initial development and needs. And I think it's important to note too that any user that would go into the park using electricity, water, wastewater would be a ratepayer as well. And so they would be paying their fair share, so to speak, for that resource.
Just to add, as you're running us through our paces, which I appreciate, Representative Porter, trust me, these companies are doing the same and bringing a lot of their teams to ensure that our plan and what we're monitoring right now is acceptable before they make that large investment. And so we not only have to answer, obviously, to this body, but also the market to ensure that the sites are ready for that investment by the company.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else? All right, one more.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The final project the IADC is presenting for your consideration and approval is a request for $20.2 million from the Site Acquisition Strategies Appropriation to acquire approximately 220 acres of land in Boone County for various infrastructure projects required to support the $3.7 billion investment from Eli Lilly that's underway and improve access to the LEAP district in support of future investment. The projects include a new INDOT interchange and local road infrastructure improvements east of I-65. The IEDC is in ongoing conversations with our partners at INDOT regarding the interchange construction and related costs, which includes potential reimbursement for the purchase of the land required for that infrastructure.
Question. So you talk about the land in here. So who's paying for the actual interchange?
INDOT will be paying for the interchange, I believe.
Okay. Questions? Representative Delaney?
I'll beat the drum again. Are we going to use eminent domain to buy land for a road? So we're not going to use eminent domain to create a public highway, is that right?
Correct.
So we'll pay in a cost higher than we had to pay otherwise.
So this was part of the process. The IDC had contacted these landowners already. And so when Federal Highway came in to look at the interchange, they didn't want to switch that process and have NDOT purchase that land. So we're moving ahead and purchasing that land, but have a great relationship with NDOT and working closely on them on how the future build out or how we could use that as a potential credit for future investment.
So NDOT is going to buy the land?
No, we are purchasing the land.
And who will own it at the end? Who will own this interchange?
We will, my understanding is we'll transfer it to NDOT to build the interchange.
And of course, I've driven by there a few times and I'm fascinated by this project. That's a perfectly fine location for an interchange, even if you weren't building these particular facilities. So there'll be a lot of use that is not by the people who are creating new businesses, is that right?
Correct, yes.
So but the suggestion here is made, there's a potential to be reimbursed for the purchase of this land. Who would reimburse for this public highway that we did not use eminent domain to acquire?
We're working closely with NDOT on what that structure could look like, either reimbursement by NDOT or future credit on future build-out of roads that are needed from NDOT's perspective.
Will Uncle Sam pay for this interchange in whole or part?
The federal government, Uncle Sam?
Yeah. It's an interstate highway.
We have not broached that. We've been working with NDOT and follow their lead on their expertise here.
Well, I'll just make the comment you've all been expecting, I assume, which is we're doing some very creative stuff. We're not using the number one tool we have, which is eminent domain. We're moving titles around. We're driving up market prices. So I wish you the best of luck, because as a taxpayer and a legislator, I'm saying we're taking an awful lot of risk here and driving up the price of that risk as we go. So God love you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to go back to the interchange. So, NDOT schedules out several years for these projects. So this is a newer project, so there's no way they could have budgeted for this in their long-term plan. So if NDOT's going to pay for this, does that mean they're going to have to take other projects away that they had already previously scheduled? Or do they have that much extra money sitting around that they could just add a project?
I would respectfully defer to NDOT on their budgeting process. But we, again, are working closely with them. They feel confident. They've gone through some federal highway approvals to date. And so, but would defer to them on the budget specifics.
All right. Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Delaney, Senator Minster, they kind of hit on the issue in regards to the interchange, but what about the state transportation improvement program by the federal government? And that's what they pay about 80 to 90% of road transportation or whatever. And Senator Mitchell said, NDOT looks 3 and 5 years down the road, and all of a sudden this pops up. So where are they going to pivot, looking at this, $9,000 potentially per acre?
So again, we'll defer to them on the budget, but you raise a good point on federal programs, and we'll continue to look at those opportunities to, bring in additional funding.
It seems like I can't say we're making up as we go, but it seems like, we're moving forward and see where we might wind up on some of these projects. That's just my humble opinion, but, I'm just very concerned about that. We just, if we have this situation, we'll adapt here. And if this happens, we'll go this way. We'll go 60 degrees or we go 45 degrees. So I'm concerned about that. That it just seems so, there's a lot of money, a lot of land to me, there's too much uncertainty.
Senator Garten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a couple quick comments. Correct me if I'm wrong. What I see here, as I paraphrase sort of the mission of IDC in the space that you're playing in, is you're attempting to take state government and move at the speed of the private sector. Is that fair?
That's fair, yeah.
Yeah. And that's a tough job to do. And I think maybe some of the questions that you're getting today are because this is a change in the norm. What I would say is I appreciate the change. I think that's where government generally fails. That's where the private sector beats the government almost 100% of the time. And so the amount of flexibility that I think we've tried to provide you with, I think is accomplishing what I believe your goals and ours as the General Assembly, to be able to mold and move and be quick and nimble with some of these things. The reality is the private sector works and operates and executes with a level of uncertainty. That's the nature of that business. And so, I am willing to accept some of that because I do understand the nature of the business that IEDC and land acquisitions and economic development space plays in. And so I get that. With regards to Representative Delaney and your comments regarding eminent domain, I appreciate the fact that you're operating with a high level of discernment and not allowing government to steal private land. I get the fact that it is a tool It's a tool in the toolbox when needed. I will tell you, that should never be the default of the government. And so I appreciate the fact that you guys are, again, operating at that level. So again, thanks for what you do. I appreciate your transparency today, and just want to say thanks.
Thank you.
Representative Delaney?
If I might, eminent domain is not a process by which the government steals land. It's a process by which a court with appraisers determines a fair market value. That's what it is. And we've deprived ourselves of that tool. So there are consequences. You and I are looking at the same coin, but on the opposite side. You're worried that we're competing with business and hurting them and buying ground they might want around. I'm not in any doubt that we're providing great advantage to some people, okay? Some people are making a lot of money off of this in the, quote, private sector. And we have chosen, this has been going on for years here, to take the number one weapon we have to make the negotiations level, and we won't use it. So we'll pay top dollar, and we'll keep chasing our tail and paying ever more. If I had a piece of farm ground that was worth $12,000 an acre and maybe had some development potential, the court knows how to assess the value of that ground per acre. And if the state said, I need that acre for some government purpose, the court would set the value. And nothing's being stolen from anybody. We have a court of appeals in case the trial court goes nuts. So I just think what we're doing here is enriching some people at the expense of the public. That's what we've chosen to do. And this transaction, I don't know what real estate brokers are involved. I don't know what commissions are being earned. I don't know who got a wink and a nod. One of our former congressmen is about to be sentenced for insider trading. You may have noticed. We have rules about these things. I don't know whether any of that's happening here. And I'm asked as a legislator to assess this project. I find that very, very difficult. But I don't see any reason to denigrate the legal system as might be suggested.
And I don't want to jump into that debate at all, but just as a practical matter, IDC does not have eminent domain authority, so we cannot use it. And to his credit, Mayor Gentry, Mayor of Lebanon, has said he would not annex any property that was involuntarily or eminent domain so all the property that we have purchased or have options under have been voluntary transaction and no eminent domain has been used because we don't have that authority.
Senator Garten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
State of Indiana has that, whether you do or don't.
We do not.
So I appreciate the clarification. With regards to you not jumping in the debate, I will. The only thing I might add, Representative Delaney, is just keep in mind 50% of the people that walk out of the Court of Appeals feel like something's been taken from them, and they don't agree with it. And so just because that's a court ruling doesn't mean that those constituents still feel like they've been served justice necessarily with land being taken from them. And so I would just highlight the fact that we should be cognizant of that as a government.
Just for the record, I don't own any land in Boone County, so. Anyone else? All right. Thank you. All right. Next, we have university projects. Purdue, Alicia Knopfsinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Alicia Knopfsinger with Purdue University. The first project that we have before you guys today is the Burke Nanotechnology Center Clean Room Modernization. This project totals $49 million to be paid for using $30 million from operating fund reserves and then $19 million from gift funds. At our Board of Trustees meeting in April, we announced a Purdue Computes, which is a three-pronged strategic initiative launched to further scale Purdue's research and educational excellence in our future of computing. So those three prongs include computer science, artificial intelligence, and semiconductors, which is the prong that the Burke Nanotechnology Center falls in today. These clean rooms are necessary for the manufacturing or assembly of semiconductors precision parts. They require a high level of cleanliness to be maintained. The room requires new air handling units, fume hoods, controls, replace HEPA filters to be installed and handle the new research capabilities of the room. The room also has to have control over temperature and its change over time, humidity, airflow, noise, vibration, lighting, and airborne particles. So this project includes procurement upgrades of specialized equipment to go in the room for device fabrication and characterization. And then we are increasing the capacity in the SickFreeze Nano Fabrication Laboratory clean room. The enhancements and repurposing of the clean room space will create the required environment for new semiconductor and quantum-focused research with industry partners like Skywater Technology, which announced in July of 2022 that it plans to open a $1.8 billion state-of-the-art semiconductor manufacturing facility in the Discovery Park District at Purdue. So this project also supports the global semiconductor shortage, U.S. supply chain, and then our Purdue Moves 2.0, which is our strategic plan under our National Security and Technology Initiative. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Mr. Jackson.
Alicia, the operating reserve amount here and then in the next project, I mean, it definitely leads to the conclusion that, I mean, wow, Purdue has some pretty big operating reserves on hand. So just in terms of, I mean, I'm assuming operating reserve is a catch-all name for more than just your day-to-day operations. I mean, if you have this much that I would assume would be in your savings account, could you kind of describe what that fund hierarchy looks like, or just it really, I mean, wow, 105 million, was that what the total was between these? 95? Yeah, I can't do math. But could you just comment on that?
Sure. The way I would describe these operating reserves and how they function for the university is somewhat similar to the state's rainy day fund. These are non-public, unallocated reserves that we have on hand. Any given year, we target having about 1/4 of our annual operating budget in reserves. And so after these two projects are approved, the dollars for these projects are then transferred to their own individual construction funds. And we are estimating, and this was, as of this week, I got this number, about $455 to $475 million in operating reserves left on hand. Those dollars are largely from F&A recovery and our investment of cash, the return on the investment.
When you said non-public earlier, so that means not the state's, in terms of whether it wouldn't be fee replacement, but just in terms of the general operating appropriations that the state contributes, that's not a portion of?
That's not included in this number that I gave to you.
It's in the operating reserves, but just not being used for these purposes, is that?
Yeah, when we generally talk about our operating reserves, it's the non-public operating reserves, which again are unallocated. Some of the other reserves that we do have on hand are allocated for future things, or whatever they will be paid for has not come to pass yet, so we still have those on hand. These are the real amount of unallocated dollars.
And so best example of non-public revenues are tuition and fees, or
the F&A recovery,
Okay.
and then our return on investment from cash investments.
All right. Thank you.
So Zach beat me to the punch, but I'm going to go a step further and just ask you, so what are your operating reserves prior to this 95 million?
All in all, I do not have that number today, but I can get that to you.
Because if you're using 95 million just on two projects, you must have a pretty healthy operating reserve.
I would say that is correct.
Is that something you can get for us?
Yes, I will ask.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right,
Okay, so the second project for you today is the chilled water capacity enhancement project, and this is $65 million from operating fund reserves. The project is going to increase our chilled water capacity by 3,500 tons, allowing production and distribution of chilled water to keep pace with the campus growth and our strategic research initiatives. From fall of 2010 to fall of 2022, there's been nearly a 30% increase in student enrollment on the West Lafayette campus. Additionally, from fiscal year 2011 through fiscal year 2022, there's been a 13% increase in Purdue-owned gross square footage. This includes 30 new facilities, building additions, and 10 major renovations. So as a result, the campus chilled water peak demand has grown 18% since 2012 and is going to continue to increase. Right now, we are renting some of this equipment, and that is a high cost to the university, and it's not always as reliable to rent the equipment as to have the infrastructure ready. So with this, we will see better, more reliable distribution of chilled water across campus. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? All right, thank you. All right, we now have reached the review items. So we have Medicaid.
You ready? Okay. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Allison Taylor, Director of the Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning. We have a handful of review items. The first one is mobile crisis units. This is a state plan amendment that would enable FSSA to cover mobile crisis services consistent with legislation from 2022. Mobile crisis units are face-to-face home and community-based interventions in the mental health and substance use crisis space. And we did provide in the memo, I think, a list of kind of generally what the services would look like, but the theme there really is 24/7 community-based intervention, stabilization, and follow-up. Funding was included in House Enrolled Act 1001. Thank you. The next state plan amendment is continuous coverage. So this state plan amendment stems from legislation from this past session, and it allows us to activate a 12-month coverage section for children up to 19 years of age. So currently we do this for children up to 3. And with this change, we'll do it up to 19. And that we're doing it per state legislation, but it's also an oncoming federal requirement. Okay, so the next one is a state plan amendment that is in response or goes along with House Enrolled Act 1568. It does 2 things. So the first part, it allows pharmacists to enroll as individual Medicaid providers in the Medicaid program. Currently, they enroll kind of with the pharmacy. So we're creating that separation. It's a necessary step for the second part, which is in the legislation that allows Medicaid to reimburse pharmacists for prescribing hormonal contraceptive patches and self-administered hormonal contraceptives to members who are at least 18 years of age. The effective date for this is in '25. That's because this will require significant Medicaid programming changes. We'll have to do systems updates, create an enrollment category, regulatory changes, and code development and all that stuff. So it'll take a little while, but that's the timeline. All right, the next state plan amendment is NEMT carve-out. So this is a state plan amendment that is the result of some co-design and collaboration work that we've done with the nursing facility industry and the ambulance industry. And what this state plan amendment allows us to do is carve out nursing facility and ambulance providers from the NEMT fee-for-service broker. This means that these nursing facilities and ambulances will coordinate and get reimbursed for transportation directly. The benefit there is it leaves those in the home and community-based settings, makes that pool smaller for the broker to work with and really ensure folks in the community are getting to the appointment, to their necessary medical appointments. All right, I think this is the last item, strategic investments. And so we're presenting, and as y'all know, in House and Rule Act 1001, we had several strategic investments in Medicaid. We have before you those associated with our waivers, including mental health and addiction, Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services, and the Division of Aging. So those three waiver categories, we are presenting waiver amendments to account for allowing us to execute on those strategic investments that were we're grateful for that you provided in the budget. Just a side note, there were additional investments, including home health, dental, and NEMT. Those are in process, but aren't on this particular budget committee. You'll see those later on down the line.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question about what's not here, if that's all right. Are there going to be any more waivers in connection with the change in the public health emergency so that some 400,000 or 500,000 people are going to come off Medicaid? Yeah. I understand there's quite a list of waivers the federal government would allow. Are we applying for additional waivers to get that done?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We currently already have 7 of those waivers that have been offered. CMS recently has brought a few more online, and we're evaluating those. And we'll absolutely give all of them, real due consideration and really investigate them as opportunities.
Is there any way to assess what our level of success is in keeping people who are eligible on Medicaid or those who are no longer eligible for Medicaid getting onto Obamacare or private insurance or whatever? Have we got any way to assess our success or lack of success?
Sure. So I think there is opportunity in the coming weeks and months. I know CMS is looking at, because one challenge of Medicaid is we don't have access to employer coverage, and that trade-off to the marketplace isn't always as clean as we'd like it to be in terms of data transparency, but federal partners are really interested in helping states get that full picture. So we know in like the National Association of Medicaid Directors and other organizations are partnering together, and private industry chambers, to figure out if there's ways to increase visibility there. So I would say that I think that will be a part of information to come.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we get people covered if they can be covered. I think that's a fundamental concern. Does the managed care, and we've changed so much from old-fashioned health insurance to managed care. Yeah. Those companies would seem to me to have an incentive to keep people on Medicaid. Are they active?
So that is one of the waivers. We are active. We've activated that. Being a managed care state, you're right, we have additional partners in that they are extensions of the office, actively engaged with their members. They are doing communication campaigns, doing door-to-door, making calls. We are texting and emailing, which is something Medicaid hasn't historically done, which is great. And so we're really leaning into all communication methods. But yes, you're right, our health plan partners are super motivated to maintain coverage and are being a really important partner in that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allison, I think you mentioned the home health piece, which I'm passionate about. I appreciate your help with that last session. When do we expect the effective date for the new updated rates that were approved in the budget for home health? And if you don't have it, I can follow up with Gus maybe later.
Yes, maybe I can follow up with you. I think we were targeting 7/1. I think we do anticipate to go retro, even if logistically, trying to execute all these rate adjustments in this same season. We're kind of navigating logistics there, but I will follow up and confirm with you.
I'll be sure to bug Gus on this one.
Yeah.
Is this going to be your last budget meeting with us?
It may logistically be, yes.
Well, I just
Thank
want to say publicly, thank you for 8 years of service to the state of Indiana. I appreciate working with you when I was an employee of FSSA and appreciate your service to our state. Thank you.
Oh,
I was going to bring that up when you were finished. I got that
Jeez.
letter this week that this is it for you.
Chairman, I believe it is. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I love the process, believe in it, and you guys have been incredible partners, really. Thank you.
Thanks for all your work. So, Budget Agency, 396 Fund. Director Jackson.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The last presenter cried. So if Steve or I end up there too, something's gone wrong. But right. So in the recently passed budget, section 292 in the back made a number of one-time appropriations. Those all required budget committee review before we initiated any of those. And so this is the transfer of $700 million from the general fund essentially over to INPERS's pension stabilization fund for the purposes of the pre-96 account. I'm happy to answer any questions about the logistics, but more importantly, Steve Russo, Executive Director of INPERS, is here to answer any questions about the funded status and forecast there. And I know we just passed out a brief presentation that will probably answer several questions. So if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll punt it over to Steve.
Button on, thank you. Thank you. So good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Steve Russo. I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Public Retirement System. Pleasure to be with you here today. The objective today is just really to focus on this $700 million incremental appropriation that was provided for during the budget bill that requires approval of this body to approve the transfer. So I put together a couple slides just to show what the impact is of this $700 million. We're always getting frequent requests for what's going on with this, and if we do this, what happens with that? And so I wanted to take our latest results as of May 31st and bake those into the equation, and of course forecast out forward, assuming we receive this $700 million before the end of this fiscal year. So with that, on page 2 of the presentation is a version of a bar chart that I typically show that shows the progression of what we call the fiduciary net position of the teacher pre-96 fund. That is equivalent to the net assets of that fund. And for those that have been around a while, that would also be analogous to the balance of the pension stabilization fund that supports this plan. And so what we show here is a 10-year look, 5 years back, 5 years forward. The gold bars to the left represent the 5 years looking back. That shows the actual balance that was in the pension stabilization fund during those years. You'll notice an incremental step forward in 2021. Two big events that year was, I'll call it the first of incremental funding that came our way. And that happened to be a year that we had 20+% investment returns that happened to happen that year. So pile that on, and then now fast forward, what's new in this chart from what you may have seen before is there's 2 bars for each of the future years, 2023 looking forward. The first bars to the right represent what you would have seen before if I had presented to you and showed you as of what we knew 6/30 of last year, what we would have forecasted the balance of the pension stabilization fund to be. And so that forecast included the $2.5 billion that we knew that we were going to get earlier this fiscal year, but we did not know about the $700 million. Maybe there was going to be $1 billion, maybe there was going to be nothing. We didn't know at the time, so we didn't forecast it. And then we've also had actual investment return performance now through 11 of the 12 months of this fiscal year. So the second set of bars is intended then to represent our latest forecast with the latest numbers that we know as of May 30th. And so what I would say a couple of these headlines is when you look at 2023 and look at the blue bar, that represents what's happened with our change in forecast with the money that we knew we were going to have. We've still got 6.5 trading days to go in this fiscal year. So we're already off to a little bit of a good part of the month, but I don't want to say too much to jinx the rest of the days here in the year. But we're on track to finish in positive territory, but likely slightly under our 6.25% target. So that's why the blue bar goes down a little bit than what we had forecasted. But then the red bar is greater in magnitude because of the extra $700 million. So the total net effect is, I'm going to round it and say $500 million more than what we had forecasted. And then when you look at the bars going forward, that's just essentially just showing the impact of that new value being projected forward at our assumed rate of return. Then to maybe then illustrate how does this impact the fund over the long haul. The next slide, I won't spend much time on. This is what I showed you, or would have showed a number of you over the last year. That was our forecast of what I used to call the hump chart. Now I want to call it a hump and a spike chart. And it shows over the long haul what we would expect to happen in this fund. And this chart on that page is just the same of what you'd seen before. And then the next page is that same chart, only baking in what we know as of the end of May, including the $700 million. And just to keep things quick, I'll just summarize, right, that the spike is a little higher with that $700 million, but that increase in the spike now roughly pulls in the cliff at which this fund is projected to be fully funded by about 1 year. So that's kind of more or less the impact of that $700 million now. And then on the next page, I just wanted to take this opportunity to start to introduce what I hope will be an ongoing dialogue over the next several years about how do we manage this fund looking forward. If you were just to take that picture I showed you a moment ago, it would portray a situation where appropriations go to zero. I hope that's the case, but that's a forecast based on a lot of assumptions and things going exactly as we assume, which I can assure you, I don't know what's going to happen, but it won't be exactly that. There might be some years leading up to it, or maybe we do a little bit better, a little bit worse, so that date might move in and out. But let's pretend that there's this date out there, whenever it is, that it does become 100% funded, and one might think there's no more money required. Well, maybe, maybe not, right? Depends on what happens with the markets. And so I didn't want to take your time today, but I just want to introduce that I believe that there's an opportunity for us at the fund. We're already starting to think about this, but we want to for sure collaborate with state fiscal leadership on, I'll call it the risk management of this plan going forward, because there really is a number of tools and options that are available and work through in terms of how we might want to ensure against the risk of anything good and or bad happening. So I just wanted to put that out for your thinking today. So with that, I'll happy to take any of your questions.
So what would the balance be after the $2.5 billion and the $700 million of the unfunded pre-96? Like if I do the math, if I take your
yeah, so if you want to do the math roughly, so at the end of if you go back to that bar chart, right, we expect that we will end this fiscal year at 8.4 billion. The liabilities of that plan are roughly 14 billion. And what I should have mentioned on the hump and spike chart is there's a solid black line that shows the funded status over time. And just to show you the great progress that has been made some 15 years ago when I first came on, the funded status of this plan had been hovering for the DB only piece, I'll call it in the 20%-ish range, has been slowly migrating up into the 30s range. And all said and done, we expect to end this fiscal year and report out after this fiscal year that the funded status is very likely to be 60% plus at the end of this fiscal year. So significant progress over the last 10, 15 years on funding this plan. The unfunded liability, the unfunded liability, so take 14 minus, so 60%, so 14 minus the 8. And so that would leave you with about 6.
Okay, I had 5.5, so I guess I was close. Okay. I like 5.5 better. Any questions? Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, so would it be possible for, like, when we reach that more money in turf, could you show us the impact of that, the budget?
Well, so I would say today, again, I'm going to round here. Roughly, there, on a normal year-to-year basis right now, there's about $1 billion, give or take, each year that goes to pay benefits in that plan. And so if you want to use today as your reference point, when this thing becomes fully funded and if things goes as planned, right, instead of contributing $1 billion, you have to contribute 0 or something around that.
The excess service dollars, is that the trigger, the Holman put on going forward?
Representative Porter, I'm not sure I can exactly know what you're referring to. I just know the funding mechanism for this plan today is that essentially the state appropriates what is needed to pay benefits. It establishes a pay-go plan initially, and there's a formula by, it sets 3% growth to fund this, presumably until it's fully funded, and then it'll be up to, I guess, those that are here working the budget at that time, what they wish to do with what might be extra appropriations available for other purposes.
I'll do a sidebar with you.
Real quick, Representative Porter, are you talking about this year's budget bill, everything over $3 billion that goes in? Okay, so that was in this year's budget bill, and it says that if our reserves are over $3 billion, that money would go into one-time payment into the pre-96. I think that's what you're talking about.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. What is not rolled into any of these forecasts is any other incremental appropriations from excess reserves or any other sources.
Well, we wouldn't even know what that would be until, at least 1 year in.
Yeah.
So.
I was talking about the future.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I could tell there was, we were talking about what we just did, and I think he thought you were talking about something in the past. So I think we're on the same page.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you for the bridge, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Delaney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Russo, it's a little hard to read this chart. What year would we reach the point of fully funded? It looks to me like
2029, 2030, 2031.
So in the 5-year, maybe 6-year range, we'll be fully funded, okay. And I'm trying to figure out how much money we've added in these additional sums. Today, we're being asked to review $700 million, but I'm looking at the surplus statement, and apparently, and I think the chairman referred to this, we already put in $2.5 billion before we get to the $700 million. Is that right?
That's correct. And if you were to look on slide 2, what we attempted to show in red is what represents those incremental pieces that have happened going back to 2021. There was actually the very first infusion, and I can't remember what year that was under the Daniels administration, where there was the first time that the concept of incremental reserves coming to the fund. That happened once. I want to say 500 and something million came at that time, but then there was no additional for quite a while, and then there was, I may get this out of sequence, in 2021 there was I think 600, in 2022 545, and then now in 2023 you had the 2.5 plus the 700 up for consideration today.
And I may be asking the wrong person, maybe this is for Mr. Jackson, but as the chairman alluded, we adjusted the formula. So there are circumstances where if our surplus got over 12.5% of our annual revenue, the additional would go to the pre-1996 fund. Is that right?
Yes, and Zach can answer details, but generally speaking, there was a provision placed way back when there's excess reserves, what happens. And from the chair I sit in, as I see that being tinkered with each budget cycle as to exactly what happens or what may happen in the future.
That's very kindly put, yes, and thank you. But that's the way the legislature acts. And there also was a companion piece, and this may be beyond your ken, of money going to automatic taxpayer refund. Those things were kind of paired. And I cannot tell, maybe the chairman can tell, you can tell, whether that still exists given the present statute, the existing statute, and then the budget content. Do you still have competition from the automatic taxpayer refund?
I'll let Zach confirm that, but it's my understanding that the original concept put in place was a split of excess between the taxpayers and to the teacher retirement fund. And as time has gone by each budget cycle, that approach to that has been tinkered with.
And where are we landed now?
I would defer to the budget director on where we may or may not be headed for this fiscal year.
Yeah, so the surplus statement that we published last Monday, that was part of the as-passed book, list of appropriations, our requirement, what we publish after the budget session, essentially showed that each year, 23, 24, and 25, we were expecting to be at about 2.7 billion in overall combined general fund reserves. Obviously, what you've been referencing is if that gets up to 3 billion, then there would be the discharge of that excess over to the pre-96 fund. What word did you use? Tinkered? Is that
tinkered?
Yeah. So like when I normally describe this, it is we look at 12.5% of what it costs to run government. What we expect is going to cost next year. And at the end of the biennium, we say if we have more than 12.5%, and it's much more complicated than that because you don't include this, you do include that, has to be more than 50 million. But once you do that calculation, whatever that excess is, half of it goes to pensions, half of it goes to taxpayer refund. In terms of but typically that's, at some point that we got on a schedule of that being at the end of every biennium. I think the way the law was amended this time, at the end of FY24, we do a look and it's 3 billion. I would need to double check the law real quick on 25 to see if it's the 3 billion or if it's at the end of 25 or it's the more traditional calculation. I don't recall off the top of my head.
Thank you.
So we suspended the ATR and just for this biennium and just said anything over 3 billion goes into the pre-96 fund.
So the net effect is for this fiscal year and the next, there's no automatic taxpayer refund.
No, that was the tinker for this budget.
Yeah. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very
Appreciate you.
much.
Thank you all.
Next, we have CHE. And you're going to do both, right? The outcomes-based and the tuition increase.
Mr. Chairman, they should be in the same presentation material that everyone should have at their seat. And yes, they are combined.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. It's nice to be with you this afternoon. I'm Chris Lowry, Commissioner for Higher Education. I think we've all met probably several times now. I was reflecting this morning. I've been in the role about a year now, and I wanted to start with, first of all, just saying thank you to all of you, especially members of the legislature, who were so supportive of the work we partnered on with all of you around higher education this year. We'll touch on that briefly as we move forward. And frankly, just on a personal note, for showing me grace during this first year. So thank you very much. For our presentation, I think all of you know Seth Hinshaw, who is with me today. He's probably worked for half of you in this room. And he is our CFO at the commission. He and I will tag team this a bit. Our presentation will cover a budget summary at a very high level, non-binding tuition and mandatory fee recommendations that our commission has adopted, the outcomes-based performance funding formula, an overview, and then details around metrics, the Ivy Tech formula, and goal setting. Very good. Again, the numbers are self-explanatory here. A little over $250 million in total increase general fund support for higher education, and over $600 million in capital projects. This is a place where I would just comment very quickly that in coming before all of you, Budget Committee, Appropriations Committee, Ways and Means Committee, and again, in individual conversations and throughout the past year, We have talked a lot about some of the challenges Indiana has faced and is facing in higher education, from the going rate to continued pressures on completion rates and graduate retention. But we've also tried to thoughtfully bring forward what we think of as opportunities to do something about those. I would really be remiss if I didn't just mention very quickly to you all actions that were taken this session that we think are going to have very long-term and positive effects for individuals in Indiana, our employers, and our communities. The 21st Century Auto Enroll, the support was just absolutely incredible. The FAFSA completion legislation, getting that across the finish line. Incentives for the Indiana College Corps, and offline we can talk with you about the degree to which Indiana's high schools are really leaning into that now because of the incentives and focus on which we're placing. Increases in workforce ready grants, dual credit funding, and so forth. We say thank you for that. Jumping right into the tuition and fees recommendation, I would start with just noting, and again, I think we talked about some of this during session. These numbers are actually updated probably from what you might have seen back in the spring. But Indiana's public institutions have been doing a good job in keeping tuition and fees at a reasonable rate for consumers. In fact, when we look at it over a 10-year period, adjusted for inflation, they're down a little over 2%. And that places Indiana 6th in the nation for holding the line on tuition and fees. I will share with you that Seth and I and our colleague Josh Garrison have been sitting out in the hall through several presentations, including with IEDC. And it's not lost on us the degree to which we have an attractive system for all post-secondary education and training plays into that formula. The formation of human capital and the degree to which our workforce is well prepared is so significant to the work IEDC is doing. And we have to be part of that formula in the state of Indiana, ranging from short-term certificates through associate degrees, bachelor's, master's, doctorate degrees. As I keep saying, it's all of the above. We need all of those things, and just wanted to share again with you the latest numbers to reflect what our institutions have been doing in terms of tuition and fees.
Thank you, Commissioner. Really quickly, just wanted to highlight for the Budget Committee members that, just to provide a little bit of perspective, I know inflation has obviously been in the news a great deal in the last several years, but hopefully this graph gives you an idea of just how dramatic the increase in inflation has been, specifically in the last 2 years. And so we've seen, I'm going to keep going. I'm on slide 7. So we've seen about nearly a 26% increase in inflation from 2013, and 14% of that has occurred just in the last 2 years. Turn it back to the Commissioner for the recommendation.
Thank you, Seth. I just want to make sure everybody's, okay, it looks like folks have the printed. Okay, very good. Yes, so the next slide is slide 8, if you're looking at the paper version there, the commission target. If tuition and fees are to be increased by an institution, the commission has adopted unanimously at our most recent meeting, thank you, that the increase should be no more than 3% each year. Seth will go into this, but CHE has reviewed the same 6 indices to measure inflation and then make recommendations for the last 7 biennia. Those recommendations have ranged from 1.4% to 4.7% during that time period. And I'll turn it back over to Seth for the next slide.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Slide this up. As the Commissioner stated, the Commission has used a very long-term approach to measuring inflation to come up with a tuition and fee recommended target each biennium going back at least until 2009, if not 2007. And what we have found is 6 indices, 4 of which are provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, tied to different indicators from the Consumer Price Index, and 2 indices provided to us by SHIO, which is the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association. And those would be HECA and HEPI on slide 9 if you were looking at those. And what we've seen in the last 4 years as we've been looking at this has been that CPI in particular has outgrown and outpaced several of the other metrics by which we measure, which is really fascinating. HECA and HEPI are largely driven by wage growth in higher education in particular, and traditionally those have outpaced CPI growth. And so what we've seen and what we believe is occurring is a little bit of a delay that you will probably see 2 years from now, where those two figures will likely start to outpace again CPI as inflation continues to come down into a more historical norm. Following the Commission's recommendation, the institutions have 30 days to hold public hearings on their tuition and fee targets which are adopted, and enough time has passed that we were able to collect that information. We're very happy to see that 6 of our 7 institutions were able to meet the 3.5% recommendation set by the Commission. One thing I do want to note regarding what tuition and mandatory fees really means, as it is something of a term of art in higher education. A mandatory fee is exactly what it sounds like. It's a fee paid by all students. And so in addition to normal tuition changes that occur at each institution every 2 years, there are largely a number of non-mandatory fees or mandatory fees that change as well. So the Commission only tracks those fees and only counts those fees which are required of all students in the body as part of that kind of percent change or that growth. And so that is something we also factor into the calculation.
Very good. We'll move on to the outcomes-based performance funding model. A couple of things I would note before we get into the next slides. I think all or most of you would remember or know that the work that was done around the outcomes-based performance funding formula this year was really predicated on a couple of different things. The work or the bill, Senate Enrolled Act 366 from now a couple of years ago, and the 2021 working group. And I wasn't part of this work at the time, but those were certainly predicates to the funding formula. In addition, I would share with you that at the May meeting of the Commission for Higher Education, all of the details we're sharing with you today were unanimously adopted by those commission members.
Sorry, just one moment.
There you go. Perfect.
Thank you, Commissioner. Apologies for the technical interruption. Thank you. So the perspective formula, we've been calling it perspective because it's looking to be forward-looking. So as many of you will recall, the legacy formula essentially created, there was a 2-year delay in the academic year's data that awarded funding. So you'd be in a situation where in the second year of a biennium, you were 4 years removed from the most recent year in academic performance that was being funded. So following the 2021 Legislative Working Group's recommendation to try and condense that data lag, we moved forward towards what we refer to as a perspective model. That perspective model, what it's really predicated on is the establishing of goals by metrics by institution that are unique to that institution. We base those goals off historic trends, and we're actually working through that process right now with the institutions, and we're receiving feedback on those preliminary goals. Funding is awarded based on progress towards those goals over the biennium. So as if an institution makes 80% progress towards a goal, they'll earn 80% of that funding. Something else that's really important to this model, as you may recall in the old funding formula, is a set dollar amount was determined in both years of the biennia. So in order to try and provide additional certainty for institutions in their biennial budgeting process and tuition and fee setting process, the formula was created such that what an institution earns in year 1 is also earned in year 2, so that their operating dollars will not decline in the second year. If they do not earn all of their dollars in year 1, there's still an opportunity to earn all of their year 2 dollars in that following year. So they will never go down, but they can go up. And finally, fiscal 24 is based off of the funding is based off the successful completion and submission of a plan to the Commission. As we were working through this process with the institutions, receiving feedback from them, receiving legislative feedback, feedback from our commission members, we started off wanting to minimize the gap in the academic year data as much as possible and to award funding based on the most recent year possible. The problem with doing that is it created a great deal of funding uncertainty where institutions wouldn't identify the funds they'd earned until fourth quarter of a given fiscal year. So in order to address that, we've implemented a one-year delay. It is still more recent data than the old model, but this one-year delay necessitates us to look at fiscal 24 a little bit differently. And so what we've asked every institution to do is provide a report to the commission which outlines how they are currently actively taking initiatives, policies, processes to make improvement on enrollment, completion, and graduate retention, as we'll get into in just a minute with those metrics. Additionally, we've asked them what are those changes in policies, practices, or procedures that are coming down the pipeline that maybe aren't in place yet, but are in response to some of these items that the commission is bringing forward to them as a priority. And again, as a reminder, those dollars, as called for in the budget bill, are allocated monthly in line with an institution's general operating support distributed monthly to them. Real quickly, we wanted to highlight at a very high level that prospective funding, the prospective funding formula which we're discussing today, is one part of a three-part way in which the General Assembly awarded new operating funding to higher education institutions. So a 2% and 3% base increase support seen there in the dark green, a 1% increase based off of the legacy model, and a 1% and 2% increase under this prospective model in the light green there. The one thing I'll also note is included in that base adjustment are items which have not traditionally been included in performance funding, such as the veterinary school and the School of Medicine.
Some of you may have recalled or will recall having probably seen this graphic a number of times. We've been using it for several months now. I see some head nodding there, to both depict the challenges and again, what we think are some opportunities to do better. And I'll walk through just very quickly in order to help set up for the next few slides, which are specifically around the metrics related to each one of those. You know, as we think about the talent pipeline, and again, listening to the folks from IEDC, you know, our team, myself, Seth, and others participate regularly with folks from the IEDC as they're talking with investors, both who are already located in Indiana, and I tend to think of that as organic growth, and then from the acquisitive side too, those we're trying to lure to Indiana to, you know, to invest capital here. And as we think about it, I just heard it again this morning. Governor's Workforce Cabinet met at Cummins, which was really one of the best meetings I've been to. But the entire focus from our colleagues and friends at Cummins was around human capital. And we know that it's such a critical part. And as we look at that talent pipeline, this is, you know, from whence our challenges that we've assessed and opportunities come. The fact of the matter is the college going rate for youth has declined 12% in the past 5 years. We'll give you a heads up. We're about to release the next series of data. It's not improved. It hasn't declined as much. We'll have that out in a week or two to you. But we're expecting, though, to see the improvements based upon the actions that are being taken and have been taken in the past year. The adult enrollment or going rate, if you will, has declined at almost the same rate, 13% versus 12% over a 5-year period. On-time completions, this is a place where I think we should take a bit of pride for a moment and look at that. The improvements have been good. They're just not good enough. We're still below 50% for on-time and right at 60% for, an extended period of time, which is categorized as 6 years. And then from the economic end of this pipeline, both for graduate retention and research, specifically, we point out that, Indiana has done a good job of attracting talent to our state. We can do better in terms of keeping that talent here. One of the things I think all of you witnessed probably last fall when some of the universities presented to you were some of those presidents leaning into it. I can't say that a year ago we would have had the exact same discussions, but by fall, we heard, among others, President Chang and President Whitten talking about it. In fact, how those are part and parcel of their strategic plans, and certainly that being the case with the other institutions. As we look at the metrics around enrollment, again, that's really the going rate for youth and adults. What we've tried to do is be very intentional about what the numbers were showing us. As we look at the declines for youth, mostly youth, but also with adults, we see that the declines have been most precipitous for low-income youth. The declines have been steep for Black students, Hispanic students, and low-income students. And so you can see the metric tied here for low-income youth enrollment and definition parenthetically there. And for adults, really focusing on adult enrollment, we've got a number of Hoosier adults who, could use that certification or who could use that associate or bachelor's degree, and both pointing to accountability and reward, if you will, for the institutions to perform in that manner. You'll also see that on just after the colon on each one of those goals, and you'll see this on subsequent pages, we are now talking about Indiana becoming a top 10. We know in various areas, on the previous slide, there was reference to being 43rd in terms of educational attainment on bachelor's degree and higher. We're looking at those facts and saying, look, that is what they are. So what do we go do about it? And we believe that the direction in which you all pointed us and the commission pointed us over the past several months starts to address those things, along with those other items I pointed out from session. So you'll see that somewhat repetitively through here. In terms of completions, again, you'll see something very similar. We've called out two things there: to be a top 10 state in completions and also from credit for prior learning. We could certainly unpack that more at another point, but that's really, helping to honor the work that adults have done, whether it's in their jobs or whether it's in some other form of training and education that could count toward credentials of value that signal to the marketplace that individuals have the skills that employers are seeking. The metrics including on-time completion overall, low-income, adult completion, and STEM completion, very much like, and Seth will correct me, I think 4 or 5 of these are literally tied to the kind of completion metrics that have been used for the past several years.
And if I could just add as well, I think it's worth pointing out, maintaining consistency in this category. Only the highest degree earned by an individual student within the fiscal year will be counted. That is kind of a carry forward from data consistency we've used in the past. And then additionally, on the STEM completion, that has a very interesting history, but the most important, I think, piece for today's discussion is that the commission is committed to, on a biannual basis, working to update that list to make sure that the programs that are being included and incentivized for growth are those programs that are those most in demand in the STEM field in Indiana.
I would add, too, as we are on the completion slide, I hadn't planned to put this in my comments today, but I think this is a spot, and we'll see it in a couple of slides now, in terms of the weighting. So, the enrollment side with going rate and so forth, completions, and then those couple on economic. I think when we started discussions, again, with many of you in this room and others, it was probably more evenly spread, and what you'll see is 70% is in the completion category, and that was frankly direct feedback from some of you, and helping us think about how we could both address the challenges we've got, but also then leverage where we have had success, like in completions. Okay, and the next slide. I've already mentioned, that Indiana ranks 40th in graduate retention. Again, the meeting this morning with Cummins, listening to IEDC, talking with the university presidents, we're starting to see a lot of really good focus by the institutions and then also by employers in being prompted to say, how can I or my organization better work with these institutions to find the talent right here in Indiana that we need? And then, of course, and it's not really significant in terms of the percentage, and you may recall the breakout, but it'll be on the next slide. Also looking at research as a place to keep our eye on as a state. It's only, you'll see 5% of the total for the 2 R1 institutions, IU at Bloomington and Purdue at West Lafayette.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. On this slide, you'll see the weighting we have broken out by a variety of institutions. One thing we want to stress here is, going back to the 21 interim study committee and the working group, and the recommendations that the commission look into more clear mission differentiation in a formula moving forward. We feel that weighting these metrics in this way is one of the major ways in which we accomplish that goal. Historically, the commission had to balance the weighting of the 5 metrics in the legacy formula between all 7 institutions, which just frankly is very challenging. And so by breaking out each institution into being measured only against themselves, it allows us to provide more variety in the weighting that we provide to each of these institutions and each of these metric categories. Also, as the commissioner noted, early on, we were weighting enrollment category, or as we'd like to call it, the going rate category, more heavily, and we have shifted some of that weighting into the completion category based off of legislative feedback and a lot of what we heard during the legislative session and continued conversation with our commission members. And then on this side, you'll just see the dollar value. This is the biennial impact of all institutions by category. Try to put some dollars and cents next to those percentages to make a little more sense of what it is that we're really looking at here for the performance funding, all things considered. Next, we wanted to give you an update on the language requiring the commission to create a separate funding formula for Ivy Tech. It was a very two busy weeks following the passage of the budget bill in partnership with Ivy Tech Community College, working very closely over those several days, trying to figure out exactly what could be accomplished quickly that met the letter of the law. So specifically, the commission is required to come up with a unique formula for Ivy Tech that aligns with the goals of the commission and also focuses on employer needs, positive wage outcomes, and stackable credentials. Commissioner Lowry in just a moment will go over what we landed on, but I do just want to stress the importance of kind of getting to what we have available to us now, what data the commission collects and has access to, and data that the university collects and has access to, and partnering to kind of get the most out of it that we can. Also understanding that we're going to start collecting and looking at data in ways we haven't in the past. And a big part of that is this charge in the budget bill. So we're very thankful for kind of that opportunity to dive deeper into these topics.
Yeah, as we look at the 6 metrics for Ivy Tech, on a personal note, I think many of you know, I was at Ivy Tech for 8 years prior to coming into this role, last 6 years of which was leading the workforce side of the college. And, I think the separation out and then the kind of metrics about which we're talking here do signal, including to investors, that we are about all of the above. Whether those are bachelor's degrees or industry certifications, I made a small star here. I know Ivy Tech has now for the last few years been tracking those outcomes, including at industry certifications, 1-year degrees, 2 years, and so forth. And that's also instructive for us, I believe, as we continue forward with all of our outcomes. I'd listened closely to conversations in here about return on investment not long ago, this afternoon. And those are the kinds of things I'm convinced we have to look at. And all of these are important to the economy, and all of these provide an opportunity for someone to get a job, a better job, or a career. Enrollment, as you can see, low-income youth, really focusing on that. Adults, completions of industry certifications. And by the way, those are widely recognized industry certifications, things like Certified Production Technician or American Welding Society and the like. Completions of certificates of less than 1 year, they tend to be 18 to 21 hours. 1-year certificates that tend to be around 30 hours, and then associate degrees, all of which also wasn't in my notes, Seth, but I think also you all should realize that from the General Assembly and Governor's Office and others, there has been a lot of, I think, strong encouragement to make sure that credentials are stackable, or that they're building on one another. And there's a lot of logic to this, and there's also a lot of logic to the way in which I believe Ivy Tech's been doing it, so that when someone has that industry certification, for example, it counts toward that certificate or toward that associate degree, and doesn't leave the learner with something that it may not feel as though it has value, that we actually show the value continuing.
And if I could quickly add, I do want to point out that the enrollment, both for low-income youth and for adults, includes full-time and part-time students. That was something that was very important in our conversations with Ivy Tech to make sure that we weren't excluding large population bases in these outcome measurements moving forward. So the final step of this process, as I mentioned, we are building goals based off of historical trends with the institutions, and the fiscal 25 payments are going to be based off of progress against those goals using the current academic years of data. This data will be available next spring, so we'll be able to inform the institutions in the spring of 2024 what their earnings will be for fiscal 25 a few months in advance. Those goals are going to be set July 13th by the commission. And as I mentioned, the institutions have those preliminary data sets that we provided them that they're reviewing now. A lot of conversations happened in the last several days and weeks on this topic. As we previously mentioned, the fiscal 24 funding distribution will begin no earlier, obviously, than July 1st of this year, and will be made monthly payments once the commission has received and approved those plans. And then fiscal 25 funding, as I mentioned, will be identified next spring, and we'll begin making those monthly payments next July 1st.
Yeah, and I will just circle back one last time and thank all of you. We know there has been a lot that has taken place in the last year. You know, I reflect on those goals that we've been setting. I shared those at a high level at the State of Higher Education address back in early April. I'm convinced, we're convinced that Indiana has what it takes, has the institutions, has the people to be top 10 in these areas, and that it's going to benefit individual Hoosiers, our employer partners around the state, and frankly our communities too. So thank you, and we appreciate again the opportunity to be before you today.
Questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cadora.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, thank you for your work. I enjoyed working with your staff since last summer, and proudly supported the auto enrollment for 21st Century Scholars, and I appreciate the work that you do. Do you mind if you go to page or slide 14? I just want to confirm my understanding of the stats. So the completion rate of 66%, that is 66% of the 53%, correct?
Yes, sir, and that's significant to point out.
So half of Indiana high school students who graduate opt out of going to college, roughly speaking. And then out of the half that ends up going to college, only 2/3 of that one half end up graduating or completing. So roughly speaking, only 1/3, 34% to be a little bit more specific, 34% of all Indiana high schoolers end up getting a college degree.
Senator, that is correct, and I will share with you, I've now said that 100 times in public presentations and longer answer than you might have been looking for. But I've also tried to point out how that looks for specific populations we've identified for focus, right? Whether that's low-income students going at 30% if they're not 21st Century Scholars. And again, kudos to all of you for just supporting that so strongly. But that 30%, which I believe the completion rate on time is 27%, right? 8.1% of those students. So again, if I seem kind of giddy about the work you all undertook this session, I am, because I think that math we have to contemplate, and I'm convinced will start to change.
And I appreciate your answer, because to me, I know there are many partners in this space looking at private educational foundations, the state of Indiana, private philanthropic foundations. But I just want to, it is extremely alarming, and this is not to cast the blame on CHE or the Department of Ed. This is a collective effort for all of us in the state of Indiana. But I just want to say it one more time, 1/3 of all high school students in the state of Indiana, only 1/3 gets a chance to go to college and get a college degree. And then on the flip side, when it comes to economic development, we're trying to attract multi-billion-dollar industries and to fuel the pipeline for these industries and compete. And then we want to move from the 43rd in the nation for educational attainment of bachelor's degrees plus master's and PhD to the 10th. Given the large count of population of high school students, 50% that doesn't go to college, and giving the large population of post or graduate students who do not stay in Indiana, do we have hard trends of understanding the why? Why 50% of Indiana high school students who graduate from high school do not go to college, and why most of 43% or 43rd in the nation as far as retaining 54% to be specific of Hoosiers with degrees or credentials beyond high school? What is that why? Did we figure that out?
Senator, I couldn't tell you we figured it completely out. But again, I think along with this body and others, we've made headway, right? When we look at low-income students, again, who go at 30%, if they're not 21st century scholars, right, but when they go at 83%, I think it's 83%, 81 or 83%, when they are 21st century scholars, I think some of you brought that data to me last summer. It's compelling to see what is possible. Or the Indiana College Corps. You know, College Corps has been around a dozen years because you all, some of you in this room were in office at the time, made sure that that requirement was placed in statute. It wasn't called the College Corps at the time, but it had a very slow uptake on the part of high schools. And I can tell you this, when I came into the role 14 months ago, 80 high schools in Indiana offered the Indiana College Corps. By last August, we had 140. By this August, again, I'll give you the headline, it'll be somewhere between 250 and 270. Right, time's a waste, and we have to do these things. And those students who have access to that, and not enough students do, go at over 90%, right? And so what we've been trying to do is identify where a school needs help. You know, we have outreach. So, you know, whether it's access, whether it's affordability, whether it's messaging, whether it's, you know, helping a student and her or his loved ones and family know the value in Indiana, we have great institutions. And they're holding the line on costs. And by the way, that's why I go any place where there are 2 or more people, so that they could hear this. We have something in this state, pardon me, that not enough folks know about. You know, it equates to the value equation. I know some of you remember, you probably got bored with them, my little 4x4s that showed 4 economic sets of data, 4 social sets of data, all by educational attainment. And it all just improves at an aggregated level with each one of those. And so yes, our partners have been helping with that. I've been asked more times than I can remember whether it was 21st Century or FAFSA or, you know, any of those that you all supported so strongly this year. So was this legislation one from the Indiana Latino Institute? Wait, was that Lilly? Was that Cummins? Was that, you know, was it this organization or that organization? I have to tell you all, I just look at folks when they ask those questions and I just go, yeah, that's right. Because I think we are seeing a broad support to helping tackle those. We have some of the whys. I'm not convinced we have all of them yet, but I do think we're starting to put in place things that will start to reverse those trends.
And I appreciate that answer. And I think the way that I think about this very complicated policy issue is that this did not happen 14 months ago or 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 10 years. This has been going for almost 2 to 3 decades.
Yes.
And you alluded earlier to the point that the next week's data is going to show that the decline level will continue to be at a similar level to what we have seen in the last couple of years, roughly speaking.
Yeah, and I should correct that. You know, what you're going to see is about a 0.5% decline, which is certainly less than what we've seen. You know, it's been 12% in 5 years, so it's
a little bit less than that.
Yeah, starting to bend the curve, and I'm probably very positive that these other things are really going to be additive to reversing the slope of that curve.
And I want to be very optimistic about our initiatives. The reason that I asked that question is if there are 50 reasons why graduating high school students do not go to college and 50 reasons of why graduates from Indiana colleges do not stay in Indiana, I can probably imagine that maybe statistically there could be top 5 reasons if we surveyed these high school students who didn't go to college and those who did not stay in Indiana. And if we come to the Senate and or the General Assembly and say we need to spend $1 billion over the next 5 years or next decade to become at the 10th best in the nation, then it will be helpful to focus these investments on these very highly correlated variables that these students told us. So I know that this is, again, as I said, this is not just CHE, but between DOE, CHE, the governor's workforce development cabinet or workforce cabinet, and then our partners in the community, I think we reached a point that we cannot continue to do the same over the last 30 years. And we need to truly invest in understanding the why, because otherwise, next session, we're going to come back with 5 pieces of new legislation, thinking that the decline is going to be, a little bit less than the year before. So that's my just comment I'll conclude by saying in my 3 years here, if you ask me about the one major policy that keeps me up at night, it would be the state's, difficulty of not being able to improve these statistics, because our economy is dependent on those students graduating, businesses, communities, in every profession, from firefighters to police officers to teachers to engineers, lawyers, CEOs. And if we can't deal with it, it's going to be a big, big problem for our future. So I appreciate your work, and I look forward to working with you and supporting in any way I can.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Gartman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, thank you. Seth, thank you. Appreciate your presentation. The 3 of us spent dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of hours together, at least it felt like this past session, and I appreciate it, sincerely appreciate the dialogue.
Thank you.
No surprise, we didn't always agree on things, but I felt like you guys were transparent. I felt like you shot me straight, and I always appreciate that.
We sure tried, Senator.
So with that, I'm probably not going to bring a new argument to you, but I do want to restate some of the things we discussed because I think it's pertinent to this conversation. And so with regards to some of the numbers that Senator Cadora just quoted with regards to half of the 2/3, which really gets us to about 1/3 of the graduation rate, right? If we can coalesce that that's the real number, I still have a really hard time dedicating 15% of funds to enrollment, because we are, and I think the analogy I used with the 2 of you when we discussed this, to me, if I relate this to the private sector, this is a business model that's compensating a salesperson on cold calls that creates no outcome. And so I do find it a little bit ironic that this is an outcomes-based formula that we're dedicating 15% of the monies to that has nothing to do with outcomes. And so I do struggle with that. I got to be honest about it. I don't think enrollment and outcomes are related. I think if we have more heavily focused on the completions will drive enrollment organically. It has to. And so for me, that's what I would have liked to seen a little differently. So I just wanted to state that. Furthermore, help me understand sort of the timing of the prospective model, the goal setting, and all that. And the reason, go ahead, we'll start there.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Great question. So the commission is going to be voting on goals at our July 13th commission meeting. Those goals are going to be based off the metrics that we first provided to institutions, I want to say last fall. We're going to be measuring their progress as we are reviewing the data they submit to us this summer and fall, and we'll have the results of that data next spring. And I'll maybe get to what I'm thinking the question is why this academic year's data? And I think there's really 2 answers to that. One, as we're building out the formula this biennia, the timeline is not going to look like this moving forward, but we did feel like it was important to establish timelines that we can carry forward. And so what we're going to see is we'll be setting goals next summer for the following biennia, but we'll still be using the 2 years newer academic data. So let's see if I get this right, 24-25 will be the first year, and then 23-24 will be the first academic year of performance, 24-25 will be the second academic year of performance. So those years will line up as they did this biennia, and that was important. But this also gets towards, we will be providing in the plan funding the graduate retention piece. One of the things we heard the most from the institutions was, while we are hearing more and more from institutions, all the way up to the institutional presidents of their desire, Indiana University, for example, that's a pillar of their new plan that they've put out, is improving graduate retention. we understand that takes resources and time in order for them to focus on it. And it's something that I think will take a little bit of time for them to turn that ship on, but we feel very strongly it's important. So we'll be awarding funds for that. But most of the remaining funding is in things that they have been incentivized to perform in for a decade or more. It may have a little bit of a twist to it or of a new flavor to it, but these are populations that we at least can track and we have access to data for. And that's one of the reasons that 70% of total funding is in the completions category, because all but one, the adult completion category, is a metric that we've incentivized going back over a decade.
So with regards to that then, and this is part of why I'm asking, I want to understand the timeline of the structure of that rollout. If this is the case, it's a little concerning. It seems to me that our institutions were maybe forced to raise tuition or have tuition increases without knowing the funding of the prospective model. Is that fair?
You know, Senator, I don't know that that's the case. I think that most of the institutions would say that they look at the outcomes-based performance funding model as, you know, what it is, which is accountability and reward for doing something that lies in front of them. You know, to the degree that, you know, as an individual or even as an institution that we count on the incentive, you know, I think there are probably a variety of opinions on that. I don't know, Seth, what you would add. I know you've had a lot of discussions.
Right. But to be fair, just to clarify, there's some ambiguity there. There's nothing statutorily in code. There's been nothing adopted. None of the institutions have a paper that says this is the funds we're getting. And so I guess my question would be, what did we base tuition increases off of? And was it a tuition increase because of the unknown? And that's my concern.
Great question. Well, I feel confident that, you know, the outcomes-based performance funding formula is, how do I word this? It is a large sum of money, but it is larger to some institutions than to others. Sure. I think, you know, what we've outlined for the institutions that was voted on at the May Commission meeting, when we, at the same time, we voted on our non-binding tuition and mandatory fee recommendation, is that their year 2 funding cannot be less than their year 1 funding. So truly what's at risk, if you want to think about it that way, is 85% of new money to each institution in year 2. So each institution will have received 5% new money in year 1, or sorry, excuse me, 4% new money in year 1 and 5.15% money in year 2, with the opportunity to earn that additional 0.85% of funding. It totals to a little bit less than, I think, right around $10 million, maybe statewide. But I feel pretty confident in saying that while absolutely institutions have the responsibility to set their tuition and fees, and I know in talking with several of them that there are a lot of factors that go into it, I feel very confident that that 0.85% of new funding that's at risk is frankly probably less substantial than even a 1% enrollment change for that institution. This is absolutely something they take into account. We recognize that, but it is not the single driving factor, at least from our perspective. But that is a very fair question, Senator.
Yes, sir. So, and I appreciate that. And just one more item, Mr. Chair, real quick. So with regards back to the metric weighting, the next thing I just want to highlight, and this is something we've discussed, is that 5% to research. I know we're talking about 5%, but I already had my 15% soapbox on enrollment. And so when you couple the 5 with that, we're talking about 25% that I have a little bit of consternation with. My understanding is that 2 of our largest institutions, you know, administrative fees to R&D is, one of them's 52 or 53%. I think another one's 56 or 58%. And so we've got 5% funds that we're dedicating, that over half of that will go to administrative fees and costs. And so I have a hard time justifying that when my understanding is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is there's federal dollars that are also earmarked to take that R&D piece for those that will fund that as well. And so when I look at that as a package, in my eyes, we're a little bit willy-nilly here with 20% of this weighting. And so would just like to hear your thoughts on that 5% and those administrative costs with regards to R&D.
Yeah, and Senator, I'll go back to the first point. We've had the discussions right around the enrollment side of it. And one of the things, your feedback and others, some may or may not recall, I think when we started the discussions back in the early winter, Commission, our Budget Committee and so forth, we're actually recommending 30%. And we tried to listen to, everyone who gave us input, and thank you for acknowledging, try to be really transparent about it too. So, I think it was, trying to find a way forward that could make sense, keeping almost all the weight on completions because we still need to improve on that so that folks who are investing, whether it's the state or whether it's an individual, that we can show outcomes. But I'll let you add too, Seth. But I did want to, mention that we really have tried to listen. And on research, I think as much as anything, raising this as a topic, we know, and I know all of you know, that placing a spotlight on the research that we do is critical. Frankly, I think we've got to put more of a spotlight on how that work happens in conjunction with business. That our institutions don't just stand alone, but the degree to which we're talking with them about the ways in which they're leveraging the private sector too, and what that means for outcomes and innovations in Indiana. So, to a great degree, it's spotlighting it and saying, we're all paying attention, and wanting to know what those investment outcomes look like. So that is part of it, with the accountability side of it. Seth, you probably had something much more intelligent to say about it.
Well, the only thing I would add is, excuse me, is that the performance funding dollars, although the way the institutions earn them is earmarked in these individual metrics, what they do with those dollars is not earmarked by the commission. So the 5% funding for IU, Bloomington, and Purdue West Lafayette, while it would be earned as an incentive for growing their research funding, and I'll add on that we're also, some of the feedback we received from Purdue in particular was looking at things other than just net research dollars, but also looking at things like patents, looking at things like startups that come out of there. And frankly, we started with the dollar side because that reporting is already done at a federal level by the institutions. But that 5%, 100% of those dollars will go towards the institution for their operations. And it will kind of have the same, if you will, flavor to it as the general line item support for those institutions.
Seth, I got to ask, are you familiar with anything else we fund as a state that has a north of 50% administrative cost tied to it?
Well, I guess my short answer would probably be, DOC and DCS are almost entirely personnel
Well, I'd love to
costed.
talk about those too. Yeah, I'm happy to discuss those as well.
No, and I think I would also add, I am not an expert on the way in which universities work with federal, philanthropic or, business on the research side. I know that with a lot of federal grants, there is a portion of funding set aside for, clawback. The state of Indiana, we actually pull federal dollars as well to cover some of the state's administrative costs in administering those federal programs. But that percentage would be very, very high to me.
Thanks again for the conversation. I appreciate it. And like I said,
thank you,
enjoyed the dialogue along this time period. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for entertaining my questions.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I did. Thank you for your presentation, Commissioner Seth. On page 14 of your presentation, you talked about the 12% decline overall. And then your comments was also made about minority students, Black students, Hispanic students. Those numbers also decline. You just made verbal comment. There's no statistics here. I would like to see, do you disaggregate the data to show actually what are the students? I don't want you to just gloss over it and just say verbally, I want to see the numbers, because I think that's very important if you want to talk about a pipeline. In regards to 21st Century Scholars, thank you for supporting Representative Harris and the Black Caucus on our initiative to get that done. That's important for a lot of us in our community. Seth, you mentioned the performance initiative that we done 2 summers ago. I sat on that commission. We had like 10 or 15 points that we wanted as a House, myself and along with Mr. Gonzalez here to go through, but none of that was ever adopted. And we had some meaningful conversations and meaningful suggestions when it came to looking at addressing that subcommittee with Senator Basher. and I think you were probably still on staff at that time. But none of that was ever entertained. So to me, that's a waste of my time and during that time. And matter of fact, I just leave it at that, because I think we could have done better. And I believe we just could have done better. I leave it at that. So those are my comments, and my question is hopefully we can do better in regards to disaggregating the data, because low-income people, African Americans, and Hispanics are not going to go away. We're going to continue to be part of this community, and we got to look at first in hopefully the 21st Century Scholars Automatic will help that, but that will not come 2 or 3 years. It would be down the road before we create that pipeline, and that pipeline cannot, I know it cannot just happen right away, but it has to create a pipeline down the road, and I just hope that we will move that forward, particularly on those 2 occasions. Thank you.
And Representative Porter, if I may really quickly too, I thank you for pointing out the disaggregation of the data. I would mention to all of you, and we're glad to send them again, at our previous gatherings with the Budget Committee, Ways and Means, and Appropriations. We broke all those out. This one slide we consolidated to 1 this time. I think we probably had 3 or 4 previously. And I appreciate you mentioning it, because the college going rate in our most recent data was 43% for Black students, 44% for Hispanic students, and we literally just tried to consolidate some of this down in order to stay focused on the tuition and fees. But I appreciate that, and we've been publishing it and talking about it everywhere we can. Thank you for raising that.
I understand that. But I understand that, and that's good. But we also, if it's out there, you guys tell us 3 or 4 times so we can retain it. That's just human nature. And so you may talk about it, but until you see it 3 or 4 times, it does not stick with us. And understand it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Representative Delaney.
Yeah, I want to ask a fundamental question. Why are we discussing raising tuition? We have a decline of enrollment. If I understand the math right, we've lost about 25,000 students from our public higher education in the last 5 or 6 years. In normal market thoughts, we would be lowering the tuition. I have the sense that we got into this conversation years ago about keeping tuition from going crazy, and we started looking at inflation and trying to beat that. But I think we're off topic. And the second comment I'll make is, if we're going to have incentives, they ought to reach the customer, not the intermediary. So telling a parent that if more kids enroll and more kids complete on time, the university will get more money is not going to sell them at anything. They're not going to see that. So what's wrong with lowering tuition? And I don't mean $5, and saying we want more people in our universities. Now that money comes from the state operating funds or from savings at the level of the colleges. They could tighten down, but the bulk of that money would have to come from us. So why aren't you asking us, in the legislature, to increase the operation funding? Then this conversation goes away. And we've got all this elaborate formula and calculation. We just had, as an example, in the voucher context, we just gave $6,000 scholarships to tens of thousands of families. Boom. That's happened, and that's going to be permanent. Well, these are state school students in state colleges and state universities. A mechanism might be to rebate tuition to Hoosiers who stay in the state. That seems to be a big priority. So instead of paying $10,000, maybe I pay $8,000, and if I actually stay in Indiana, I get $2,000 back for each year later on. We've got to find direct incentives to get kids to go to college. I'll end the soliloquy on the other point. I'm sick of all the talk about student loans. Every dollar we lower tuition lowers the need for student loans by $1. It's just that simple. So I think we're off topic. I think the topic has got to be, what do we got to, give our people to have more of them go to college. So that's my view, and all this other stuff is just too complicated and doesn't reach the customer. That meaning the customer being a combination of parents and students who sit down and decide, what am I going to do in my life? So I thank you for the effort. I do think the new formula is better, no question about that, but I still think we're not addressing the big topic. I think we have great schools, and our customers aren't showing up. So we've got to do something to appeal to the customers. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members.
All right, that was the last review item. So, is there a motion to remove anything from the amended agenda? Is there a motion for the agenda?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
All right, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. So next up, we have our discussion item, the Honorable Chris Johnston.
I didn't realize that was so demanding. Okay. Mr. Chairman, before I start the discussion item, this may be unorthodox, but may I take a brief moment to provide a point of clarification on a previous agenda item? Okay. The question about the interchange up in Boone County, about the source of funding, I believe Representative Porter asked, is this going to be funded like a traditional NDOT program, 80-20 federal and 20% from the state? And it is. And then you also, Senator, asked about the program. Does it disrupt the programming because we've got a new project, that has come in, and because of other changes in the other projects that have been programmed or part of the 10-year plan, it hasn't disrupted other projects. So it's going to fit into the 10-year plan as they've prepared. So
thank you for the clarification.
With that, good afternoon. I'd like to touch a little bit on federal funds. Haven't been here, I think, since December. And so I will move expeditiously through the slides. You've had a long afternoon. What I usually talk about is the American Rescue Plan, ARPA, also the infrastructure bill or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And those two, I really want to provide some updates on the appropriations, the spending levels, also the deployment of some of the formula funding as it pertains to the infrastructure bill, and then some of the future funding opportunities. But some of the things that you may have heard recently of other federal legislation is the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and you may find this odd that I put the debt ceiling in there. But with the recent adoption of the debt ceiling, there was a provision of potential clawbacks of previously unobligated COVID money. And at the end, or from about March of 2020 through March or April of 2021, there were as many as 4 or 5 pieces of federal legislation that probably fall in the bucket of COVID legislation. I don't have a good answer for you because the agencies that have received funding from those sources are still working with the federal awarding agencies for clarification as to what is actually on the chopping block, potentially on the chopping block. There are 2 areas that I think I'm going to be following up with, and that is from the Department of Labor. There's administrative support funding for unemployment insurance. That seems to have been highlighted in various publications. And then also in the health space. When COVID first hit, a lot of the legislation that in programs that came out related to the CARES program, instead of having a very short and tight time period trying to fight the pandemic, because of the needs for testing and setting up a lot of new programs that haven't been around the country, they have a longer tail period. And so some of those may be deemed unobligated at the local level, and that's really what a lot of the states are trying to figure out. It may be obligated at the federal level, but because it's a drawdown basis, just because we might have an allocation, we may not, the state of Indiana may not have spent that money, and it's still being interpreted whether that is deemed to be unobligated at the state level. So we'll as we learn more, we'll report back when we come before the committee. You've seen this table before. These are the appropriations from 2021, and then also any programs that came before the this body as far as reallocating any of those appropriations. Reminder, we have until 2024 to obligate these funds, but because the General Assembly has appropriated the money or the State Budget Committee has allocated those funds that have not been appropriated, the federal government will deem those to be obligated. So really what we're looking towards is the spending deadline of 2026. And so you've got a range of programs here. Some of these, I'll say, the public safety equipment and training. You might remember that was body cams for state police and body cams for locals, stab vests for the Department of Correction. Those are spent, right? Those are easy to spend. Then you've got a range of programs where you have to actually stand up grant programs, and those are the ones that we really need to monitor as far as the pace of spending. But right now, and we'll have a better report, or a better number in a future meeting, but at June 30th, we have another reporting quarter end. Then we report by July 31st all the spending and obligations that we have locally. But right now, we're approximately 40 to 50% spent. So we're 2 years in. We still have 3.5 years to spend the money, so we're at about 40 to 50%. Now, a lot of that has to do with some of the programs we'll talk about is the UI Trust Fund. Well, that was one big allocation of $500 million that went out the door very, very quickly. And then another example would be the transit projects, the South Shore Railroad. They were on, that project's on time. We were able to use that money quickly. And so there's two big chunks of money of that spending that makes up that 40 to 50%. It's really the other programs where our state agencies are establishing its own programs. They're putting out RFPs, they're evaluating proposals, making sure that money moves promptly through 2026. Excuse me, 2026. Just hit on some of the programs very quickly. There was the Health Challenges Grant, had its separate legislation back in 2021, but we used ARPA to fund those programs. They were focused on these 10 program areas that you see. There were about 150 awards for $35 million. There's been 1.1 million encounters, and so that could be people getting screenings, testing, but the biggest encounter focus area has to do with the food insecurity. So that could be, food banks or the grantees providing basic foodstuffs for citizens in their communities. The next round has been RFP'd and the awards have been made, but their effective date is starting July 1 there. One thing on this also, we were talking about metrics a little bit earlier. Part of the Health Challenges Grant required the Department of Health to establish metrics. And so they've been working with the Management Performance Hub. They're going back to their grantees and they're showing them the dashboards and the metrics that will be published eventually on the Department of Health website. So I hope to have more on that soon. The challenging thing, back when I spent a little more time of doing performance measures for state programs, it is a tough area in the Department of Health because sometimes you need to develop a proxy it takes a long time to move the needle on diabetes or the cancer or smoking cessation. And so, what we think is outcomes, what we want to see may be 10 years down the road, but what's a good proxy to show that we might be influencing behavior and outcomes in a positive way? In the mental health area, that was $100 million. Almost all of it has been obligated or programmed. But one of the big ones here is the Community Catalyst Grants. There's 37 of those. Another, we talk a lot about workforce, and particularly in specialized area, and there is a $15 million, probably 2 grants for workforce recruitment and retention in this space. It is oversubscribed. I think they told me they had proposals of $190 million. And they expect to have FSSA to grant those awards in July or August. Here's something that we haven't touched on probably since the pandemic, and we were talking about the CARES Act and the Coronavirus Relief Fund. This is the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. And so you can see that how it leads up before the pandemic from 2019, and it had a balance of $850 million, close to $900 million. Then the pandemic struck, and it actually went underwater. At the lowest point, we were actually borrowing about $125 million from the federal government. And so at that time, at late 2020, we used $400 million of the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And that's what actually brought us back, into a positive. We paid off the loan to the federal government, brought us back to a positive situation. And then the other, from where you see about September of 21, is the allocation of this appropriation from the ARPA funds of $500 million. So by the end of 2021, we were back to the level of pre-pandemic UI trust fund balance. And then the growth from there has just been from normal collections from employers. So haven't really provided any update on that, but I think that's a positive story there for using those funds. On trails, just a recap, the box on the right-hand side, I had presented that some time ago, but those were grants of about $30 million for trails. And then the remaining grant is for the Monon South Trail, and that obligates the entire trails allocation from ARPA. And the small box on the right, or in the lower left-hand corner, talks about the number of communities, counties, and the miles that are involved with that project. Infrastructure, a lot of the ARPA money is used for infrastructure. There's about 40 road and bridge projects. That was $1.1 billion. 100% of it's been obligated, and it's addressing a myriad of projects on interstate, state highways, and state roads. The IFA is administering about 70 water, sewer, and stormwater projects. They still have some projects where the engineering isn't done yet, and so that's not fully they're not fully obligated. And then the READY program at IADC has 358 projects in their portal that have been, about 85% of them have been approved and consuming $485 million of their $500 million. 8 of their 17 regions that submitted proposals are 80% or higher as far as submitting approved projects. Broadband, this is a chart we've presented before. This is a combination of both funding from another component of ARPA, the Capital Projects Fund, and then a small amount coming from the State and Fiscal Recovery Fund of ARPA. We've done 3 rounds of next level connections from a range of sources. This round 3, the blue up there, is the coming from the Capital Projects Funds. That's about $181 million. We're at an inflection point now in the broadband space, and I'm going to touch base a little bit on this with the infrastructure bill in a program called BEAD, which is going to be announced here very, very soon. So moving into the Infrastructure Act, covers 5 or 6 major functional areas. In the transportation space, this is one, remember now that the infrastructure bill is about 75% formula funding and 25% discretionary or competitive. And so a lot of the NDOT funding is really just applying for recurring or rolling programs that come up. And so as programs or projects they may not be successful on, it doesn't stop them from resubmitting the project and using either another program that Federal Highway is administering or coming back for future rounds. And so some of the projects that they're going to be using here shortly in different rounds before the end of the year are projects on I-64 and 265 down south, the Lloyd Expressway near Evansville, 8094 in northwest Indiana, and then the Ohio River Bridge and interchange in Evansville. One announcement that occurred last week had to do with charging stations, NEVI, as they call it, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure. They had a draft RFP, and so I presented a map before of there's major corridors along the interstates to build out charging station infrastructure. They've had a draft RFP, collected comments on it, so the final RFP to actually manage this process and install and maintain the charging stations is going to be released on July 7th. They expect proposals in August. Short turnaround since the draft has already been out there and people have seen it and commented on it, and then they anticipate making selections and awards later this year in November and December. Department of Natural Resources has received formula funding for orphaned wells. 100% of their $25 million has been obligated for 12 projects involving 350 wells. Abandoned mine lands is, again, an existing program. They've received, been awarded almost $25 million. This is the first of 15 annual allotments. They're going to get a total of $370 million for abandoned. This is the, I forget what, years ago, the Surface Landmine Act, but it's to help address those needs. And those projects are going to start July 1st. We usually get $5 million a year on that. Office of Energy Development has been very active. They were just awarded $9 million, which is the first 2 years of a 5-year award of $23 million. And that's for modernizing systems to really address extreme weather and natural disasters, and then making sure that power is delivered for essential community services. The Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, their application's due next month. That's very similar to the state energy program, and so what they'll do is probably apply for that and then feed that into a much smaller program, the state energy program, and really try to accomplish the same things. The Grid Innovation Program, this is not uncommon in a lot of these big energy projects where they're asking the states to submit concept papers, and then the federal government and the U.S. Department of Energy is evaluating the ideas that they get around from the country, around the country, and then that helps them refine sort of their RFP process. And so the Office of Energy has submitted that. It tapped the resources of a lot of the utilities here in the state for that. This could be up to $250 million. Then it would also be matched by the utility industry for reliability of transmission and distribution services. Cybersecurity, we're still waiting to get the final approval. We have preliminary approval. This is a joint effort with Homeland Security and the Office of Technology, funding of a total of $100 million, or $80 million, $20 million over 4 years. Now, I'll touch a little bit on the broadband. So we're in the middle, so we're finishing the Next Level Connections program, which I mentioned had several different sources of funding. The BEAD program is a total of $42 billion across the country. Substantial amount of money for broadband. They're asking each state, you have 2 planning grants. We're in the middle of those planning grants. And we're actually looking at what is the organizational needs of this. There are a lot of, when it comes to the federal requirements, permitting requirements that deal with NEPA, environmental permitting. There's also historic preservation permitting. And so we're looking at all of the different skill levels that are needed out there and make sure we have the right resources to move that along. The funding of, and this is all based on the maps. And maps have been a really contentious item for years. It's provided by the FCC. They get their information from the providers, the ISPs. And so there's been a long challenge period where communities can go in and say, you say I have service of a certain level in my community, but I'm at either a much lower level, or I have terrible latency of my service, or I have no service at all, but you say that little dot says my community's served. So this challenge process has been going on for some time. And states were able to put in challenges to these maps. Indiana did that. They're supposed to announce then this allocation to all the states by next Friday. I'm hearing that it could be earlier than that, early next week as well. The interesting thing there is they're raising a bunch of, people are saying, can we trust the maps? And what we're hearing from the federal government is that the money is so large that they're going to allocate that you would have to have so many challenges to skew whether, and I'm just going to say, whether Michigan gets more than Indiana. So they're not really worried about the challenge process, to be honest with you. They're going to come up with their dollar amount, and they're going to say, here's what Indiana's award is, along with the other 49 states. Now, GAO and the Congressional Research Office also pointed out some other things of, this is just another layer of a program that's been going on for a long time. GAO says there's 100 different broadband programs in the federal government and administered by 15 different federal agencies. And this is just the latest one. And so I think there's going to be even more sort of rulemaking and trying to cut down on duplication. So we're not done with getting what the actual rules are, which has not been uncommon with a variety of programs. Just a couple others here. Weatherization, that's just additional funding for an existing program that the housing already administers. A small manufacturing leadership for small and medium-sized businesses, for clean energy use, and then also upgrading their process controls. The other is, you may have heard about hydrogen hubs. Indiana is participating with Michigan and Illinois in an application for hydrogen hubs, just because of the heavy industry that the 3 states have, in addition to the transportation network that connects very closely all those 3 states. And so 33 concept papers have been submitted for that. And as I've mentioned, 6 to 10 different hubs are expected to be announced later this year. The other programs that you may have heard about and have not really touched on before, and still getting our sea legs under us for this, is the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, the primary tool for that are tax incentives, and they're really driven to the private sector and individuals for clean energy initiatives. There were new rules that just came out last week that we're trying to get our arms around, and that's what's called elective pay or direct pay. And it's basically monetizing or converting these tax credits by state and local governments to turn it into cash, so that if you have projects that meet clean energy requirements, you can use it to offset the costs of those elements of your project. You've seen the budget. We have a lot of projects that we're considering, so we're looking at are there opportunities for us to convert these credits into cash to help offset the costs of some of these projects that are planned? And then the CHIPS Act, this one is in process as well. This is for tech hubs. And there is a process that's being led by IADC along with Applied Research Institute to put our application in. This requires having a consortium of different team representation, higher ed, high-tech companies, state and local governments, economic development, laboratories. So they have a set requirements for participation. And then there's a geographic area that you have to declare. And then you really try to give your primary focus in your technology area. There's 10 key areas. You're not limited to just one. You can say that our tech hub is going to pursue let's say biotech manufacturing, medical technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, et cetera. And so we're looking to get the designation. What I understand from IEDC is you can go for designation, then you can also ask for planning. We think between what's going on between Purdue, Notre Dame, IU, and the other, Lilly's and Roche and other businesses that are involved, we have the skill set and tools necessary to put the plan together. So we'd rather not drag it out, get the designation, so then we can start qualifying for larger funding later this fall. Let me stop there and answer questions.
Questions? Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chris. Mr. Johnson, thank you for being here. Appreciate this update. Thank you. We requested this. It's always good to know where the money is and where it's going. I have two questions, if you will, please. The first one is on page 4, and I think you and I've asked the question before, in regards to round 2. I think that those dollars were kind of intent to help with goes toward minority communities.
Right.
For the most part, and I know there has been some discussion in regards to that. I know there was $500,000, I think you said, that went to Indiana Black Expo on a reimbursement to help small businesses, et cetera. But that's only $500,000 out of the awards of $9 million. Could you break down those allocations for me or for us in regards to minority participation?
Let me get that. Each of these program areas, if somebody was going to apply, part of their application was a minority health plan. They had to put that in there.
Yes, sir.
And so let me get the statistics on that.
Yes, yeah, I really appreciate that. That's important for us to know. Also, on page 11, final question, Mr. Chairman. On the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, how are we doing that in regards to minority communities? They came in last year and met with NDOT, and we were supposed to make some modifications. I don't know whatever happened to that, if it occurred or not. I know Representative Pryor was pretty much with that, along with the NAACP and Denise Rockman and people like here. So could you enlighten me on that one? Yeah. And then in regards to the competitive grants, which ones we applied for and which ones we did not?
Okay. For
the list of the transportation grants.
Oh, in the transportation?
Yes, sir. On page 11. Sorry.
Okay. So the ones that we applied for and
the ones we did not apply for. Because I've always asked that question. We always sometimes kind of miss the due date for application process.
Okay.
As a state, not you, but as a state.
No. I'll ask that.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Other questions? All right. Thank you, Chris. You know what, now why don't we do the first commission? Let's do that first. No pun intended.
Mr. Chairman, for the first commission, I'd like to nominate co-chairs, being yourself, Chairman Mishler, as well as Chairman Thompson from the House to co-chair this commission.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. So now it's time to elect the new chairman. My 2 years are up.
Yep. I'm debating whether I want to nominate, if it's appropriate to nominate myself. I'm going to pass, so with that said, I'd like to nominate, I'll move that we nominate Representative Thompson, Chairman Thompson, as the new Budget Committee Chair, effective July 1st.
Second.
I
do have more. First of all, thank you, Chairman. You have been a great person to work with. You've been transparent. You ask the questions, and you've been very engaging. And I really appreciate your leadership on the Senate side. It does come over to the House, and we get together and do things. So I just want to publicly thank you for your hard work here and in General Assembly. And I welcome working with Chairman Thompson over the next couple of years, because he will use the word, it would be a great opportunity to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for your kind words. All in favor? Opposed? All right, so we have a new chairman, but I just want to say thank you to the committee. I can't even think how many years I've been on this committee. I've chaired it now 2 stints. So I've done 2 chairmanships, and I want to thank, first of all, the staff, like LSA staff, you know, the House and Senate fiscal staffs and the members. And, you know, when you travel around the state, first of all, you can see things around the state that you didn't know we had. You know, some of our state parks are some of the most beautiful places probably in the country, some of the nicest state parks. So I think the greatest thing about this was the people and the places that we get to go. And the other thing I like about it is you really get to know the members. You know, when you travel together and you spend time together and we get together for dinner and sometimes after dinner, you know, you develop lifelong friendships with a lot of the members. So I just have to say I really enjoy the members of the committee, and I just thank everybody for cooperation and being a good committee. So thank you very much.
I too. Okay, well, not until July 1. So but that was the motion, is my understanding. Yes.
I did say July 1st.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because our next meeting is until August anyway. So I got to sign minutes.
I too want to thank you for your service, Senator Mishler, and what you've done. And I've learned a lot more to learn. I know that, and I look forward to working with the committee. So thank you.
Any other business? All right, with that, I thank everybody, and we'll adjourn. You want to announce the next meetings? Oh, you know, we do have a schedule the next meeting, so.